The site director was boiling over with rage. This was supposed to be a safe facility, one where low-threat and well-behaved humanoid SCPs were kept with minimal security. But if this kept up, these containment breaches could easily bring the attention of SCP brass, the last thing any of them wanted.
Can anyone explain?
The director demanded, pausing to calm himself.
Why do we have so much trouble keeping this subject safely contained? This is not the first containment breach!
The security team looked at each other nervously. Well, sir, nothing is ever certain. We made sure everyone has the proper security protocols in place, but SCPs are always unpredictable.
It's a little girl!
The director slammed his fist on the table.
Look at these security protocols! Stuffed animals, playtime! This girl is obviously not a threat! So what's going on here?
The security heads exchanged another nervous glance. You're right, sir. The specimen isn't the security threat here. It's the researchers. SCP-2118 was secured by the Foundation with both minimal apprehension as well as a smaller team of personnel, after multiple reports of her unique abilities were identified. She appears to be a normal child under 10 years of age, with orange hair and a long scar on her right cheek. 2118 claims that her scar is the result of an assault by a stranger on the street. She communicated this via sign language, as she rarely, if ever, vocalizes words. She is, however, capable of speech, and that is where her unique abilities lie. SCP-2118 does not speak in her own voice, and it is still unclear as to whether or not she even possesses one. Her speech only activates in one situation, in the presence of a parent who has lost a child under the age of 18 to death. Under this circumstance, only will SCP-2118 begin to speak, but rarely in the same voice twice, because SCP-2118's voice isn't her own. Automatically and involuntarily, 2118's voice pattern becomes that of the child who died, speaking to their parent in a way that reflects both the age and gender of their deceased offspring. The voice that is heard is referred to as SCP-2118-01 by the Foundation. SCP-2118 is aware of her speech and vocal patterns as well as the psychological distress they cause the parent, as she will use sign language to apologize even as SCP-2118-01 continues speaking. But this isn't the only disturbing part of her abilities. While at first the conversation can be generic, most times the words and sounds coming out of SCP-2118's mouth reflects the final words and sounds of the dead child. This not only includes disturbing pleas for help, but can reflect the actual sounds of dying, mimicking the agony of drowning, disease, or death by fire. SCP-2118 wasn't necessarily a danger to anyone. However, her presence could absolutely pose a dangerous temptation. The director finished looking over the files. It seemed like everything had been handled smoothly and by the books when SCP-2118 was initially brought in. But along the way, something had gone wrong. The case was being handled by one of his most trusted researchers, Dr. Wu. As it became clear that SCP-2118 didn't talk normally, translators who could interpret ASL were brought in for the first interview. Dr. Wu and site psychologist Dr. Lavoie welcomed this strange little girl to the SCP facility. This interview provided the Foundation its first intel on where SCP-2118 had come from. At first, the little girl was alarmed. She didn't like being referred to by her SCP number and insisted on her original name. She understood that she was in a science lab of some sort, but thought she had been brought there because she had done something wrong. She referenced a woman attacking her with her purse at one point, and also claimed that anytime she spoke, people would get angry. But then she revealed something more disturbing. She knew why people got angry when she spoke. From her mother. She had lived with her parent, and at some point her mother had lost a baby. After the traumatic incident, every time 2118 spoke, she spoke in the voice of the sibling she had lost. This caused her mother to become angry, and out of shame, provoked 2118 to glue her own mouth shut to prevent it from happening. Due to the glue being a little too strong, it resulted in a visit to the hospital, something she thought might happen again at the facility. But no one was sure if she was scared of it, or hoping for it. More than anything, the little girl just didn't want people to stop talking to her. The Foundation had a long way to go in understanding SCP-2118's abilities. Dr. Lavoie and Dr. Wu both seemed to have a good rapport with the girl, and they were kept in charge of her case. Neither one had children and could converse with her without difficulty as long as a translator was present. But to test her abilities, there would have to be an experiment conducted involving someone who could actually activate them. And it just so happened that D-3498, a volatile conscript working at the facility, had been convicted of the murder of his wife and his daughter. But the experiment would prove to be more than anyone was bargaining for. As soon as D-3498 was brought in, SCP-2118 became silent. After about 30 seconds, she signed an apology for what was about to happen, and then began screaming at the top of her lungs. She cried out for her father in an anguished voice, all while signing apologies. D-3498 became increasingly angry, demanding to know what was going on. He struggled against his restraints and howled obscenities as he listened to his daughter's strangled pleas for help, begging, and ultimately, her death rattle. 2 agents, recorded as Agent M and Agent C, were brought in to end the experiment and remove D-3498. And that's when things took an unexpected turn. While Agent C removed the D-Class, Agent M seemed oddly fixated on SCP-2118. The reason why became clear as soon as SCP-2118 opened her mouth. "Mama?" The voice had changed completely, to that of a young boy several years older than the D-Class's daughter. The boy seemed distraught, complaining of being cold and scared and wanting to know where his mother was. Agent M seemed frozen in place and didn't answer Dr. Lavoie's questions. The experiment was quickly terminated. SCP-2118 was removed to her living quarters, and Agent M was removed from duty with the case of a possible missing or murdered child referred to police authorities. SCP-2118 may have cracked a cold case, but she also posed a dangerous temptation. It wouldn't be long before the case had its first security breach. Researcher Anselman conducted an interview with SCP-2118, despite not being assigned to the case. Anselman didn't have access to the SCP's living quarters, so he watched SCP-2118 sleep and then communicated with her through the glass. The events were captured on facility cameras and showed that SCP-2118 was agitated from the start, knowing that Anselman was not supposed to be there, and Anselman had an ulterior motive. As soon as the conversation began, SCP-2118, using sign language, asked Anselman why she was being made to do this. Soon afterwards, SCP-2118 started speaking in the voice of a prepubescent boy that Anselman called Dewey, and who referred to Anselman as Dad. The boy was clearly agitated, as was SCP-2118, and asked his father what happens after they die. Anselman became upset, wanting to hear answers from his lost son, not questions. SCP-2118 tried to warn him off, letting Anselman know that he couldn't actually communicate with his son through her, and she couldn't help him. But Anselman persisted, watching as SCP-2118 imitated the sound of a boy gasping and taking his last breaths, consistent with a death from illness rather than accident or violence. All the while, SCP-2118 just watched sadly. The security breach was soon discovered, and researcher Anselman was removed and reprimanded for unauthorized testing with SCP-2118. But thanks to the researcher's breach, the Foundation did gain new knowledge of SCP-2118's abilities, namely that she couldn't actually channel the spirits of the dead. She was a mimic who could involuntarily duplicate their last moments, but couldn't provide any new information from them or answer questions that they didn't know in life, and she didn't have any special knowledge of what came after life. But her abilities did have one unique potential. By channeling the last moments of a deceased child, she could possibly provide answers for authorities as to their whereabouts or their killer, as she had unexpectedly done with Agent M. The problem was, this process seemed to be deeply disturbing for SCP-2118, who showed great emotional distress when forced to channel a dead child and consistently apologized for the effect on the parents, which left the Foundation in an ethical dilemma. "Sir, how do you want to proceed?" The site director looked over the files. Clearly this couldn't continue, and something needed to be done. But none of the security breaches or other incidents had been SCP-2118's fault. She had been cooperative, despite the trauma these tests seemed to cause her. To keep her safe and to preserve her use to the Foundation, things would need to change. We could transfer SCP-2118 to a more secure facility, but I'm not going to do that. Keep herself furnished with all the things a girl her age would want. It says here that she likes orcas and elephants. Take her outside to an enclosed play area once a day for about an hour, no more. But above all, make sure she's always with an attendant who can converse in sign language. She's not to be around anyone who has had children unless it's necessary for testing. Convey these new parameters to Doctors Wu and Lavoie, and make sure to increase security around her quarters, as much for her protection as anything else. The security team scurried off, happy to have avoided the director's wrath. The director turned back to the files. Yes, he had solved the problem for now, but he would have to keep a closer eye on the facility as a whole. The SCP Foundation did close background checks on its staff and on D-Class personnel before bringing them in, but SCPs were unpredictable, and you never knew what could make someone a security risk. How many employees working at the facility had lost a child? How many, like the disgraced researcher Anselman, would do anything to hear their child's voice again, even if it was in the middle of death?
Warning. This site is for SCP personnel with O5 approval. Access beyond this point for those with standard level 4 security is prohibited and may result in termination of Foundation employment. Unauthorized visitors who survive the memetic kill agent are detained and interrogated under truth-exacting memetic agents. Dr. Herman Wright was used to high security protocols. He had been working with the SCP Foundation for several years and had dealt with specimens both terrifying and valuable. But something about this site was different. The security was tighter than he'd ever seen. It had all seemed a bit too much for what looked like a run-of-the-mill warehouse in Alexandria, Egypt. The street seemed normal. It was surrounded by businesses selling food and clothes, and none of the locals seemed to give a second glance. But as soon as he was approved for access and entered the warehouse, it was a very different story. He looked into the cognitohazard testing screen, designed to cause psychic damage to anyone who hadn't been inoculated by the Foundation, and entered the large bunker. Automated guns lined the walls. He could see the outlines of trapdoors below him, and he was pretty sure the whole place was rigged to blow if a large-scale assault hit. The Foundation was taking no chance with whatever they had found in Egypt. What could they be keeping locked up below? As Dr. Wright walked through the long tunnel leading to the staircase, he could see a series of rules marked on the wall. No open flames allowed within SCP-4001. No firearms or bladed weapons allowed within SCP-4001. All writing utensils brought into SCP-4001 must be approved by a majority of the O5 Council. Violating these conditions could cause a CK-class restructuring scenario, or an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. Dr. Wright's mind raced as he entered the massive antechamber and descended the staircase, but he wasn't prepared for what he saw. It was a library. The biggest library he had ever seen, with bookcases stretched as far as the eye could see. The library was far bigger than the warehouse looked from the outside, and Dr. Wright assumed it must be a disguise built on top of the much bigger, older facility that had been discovered by the Foundation. It wouldn't be the first time the Foundation found something that didn't conform to the laws of Euclidean geometry. SCP locations often played by their own rules. As Dr. Wright exited the staircase and walked up to the first bookcase, he could swear he heard rustling sounds among the shelves. Was something moving? He hadn't seen anyone walking the aisles when he descended the staircase, and he was pretty sure he was alone here, wasn't he? Making things stranger, a quick look at the bookcase didn't show any books he was familiar with. None had standard titles. In fact, they all seemed to follow a simple format. Each title a different individual person. All books looked the exact same. Same binding, same thickness, same number of pages. Was this some sort of SCP reference library? Suddenly, a hand slapped down on Dr. Wright's shoulder and his heart nearly jumped out of his chest. He turned to see a gray-haired man in an SCP lab coat extending a hand to him.
Dr. Waylon Henricks, Chief Scientist in charge of testing at SCP-4001. You must be Dr. Wright.
He didn't give Dr. Wright a chance to respond. Dr. Henricks didn't seem like the kind of man to be very interested in what others had to say.
Yes. About time the Foundation sent me a new research assistant. I suppose you have a lot of questions?
Dr. Wright was supposed to be a researcher, not an assistant. He didn't suppose it would do any good to point that out.
When Dr. Wright tried to question what it was that he'd be researching, Dr. Henricks told him that it would be easier to show than explain. With that, he motioned Dr. Wright to a nearby table, where one of the countless identical books on the shelves was waiting. He nodded at the book, prompting the younger doctor to turn it over and read the title. He couldn't believe what he saw. There on the front of the book was his name, Herman Wright. Dr. Wright looked at his colleague in confusion, and Dr. Henricks motioned for him to take a look. It was written in a language that he had never seen before, but was somehow instantly recognizable and understandable. And the book really was about him. Every detail of his life had been written down in this volume, starting with his birth, containing details that no one but he knew. His whole life story was here. From his childhood to his education to his eventual recruitment by the SCP Foundation. But the book wasn't completed. The last line that had been written described his entry into the secured confines of SCP-4001 that very day. Dr. Henricks had a mad glint in his eye.
Are you starting to understand? One for each of us. Every person who has ever lived, roughly 120 billion people since the dawn of man. Their lives all written down in these books. Every time someone is born, their book appears in this library, and their story gets written as it happens. The Foundation has been monitoring this site since the 1800s, but it's been operating much longer than that, since the dawn of recorded history.
Dr. Henricks passed Dr. Wright another book. It was simply titled The Hunter, and it chronicled the life of a prehistoric man who spent his days searching for wild game. He lived 23 violent, monotonous years before his story ended abruptly when a saber-toothed tiger decided it was interested in the same mammoth he was hunting. This must have been one of the oldest books in the library. A book for every person on Earth. Dr. Wright could only imagine what the scale of this massive library must be. Dr. Henricks explained that mapping the library was a huge challenge, before producing a map from his pocket and laying it out on the desk.
You're at base camp. This is where new births generate on the shelves along with books pertaining to the first humans. If you want to track down specific books, you'll need to know where you're going. We've established base camps around the library to mark significant eras in human history with notable books. At each camp, you'll find generators, supplies, and beacons to light your way. If you're going back far enough, you could be traveling for days or even weeks.
Dr. Wright was fascinated by this bizarre location, containing the sum total of human experience within its massively expanding walls. But there was one thing he couldn't figure out. Just why was this seemingly harmless location featuring constantly changing books the most securely guarded SCP he had ever encountered? Dr. Henricks knew he was referring to the extensive rules he must have seen as he entered. The other doctor reached into his pocket and said,
"Let's just say that around here, the pen is mightier than the sword."
He pressed the pen into Dr. Wright's hand and flipped open the back page of his book. It was blank, the rest of his story waiting to be written.
What's something you've always wanted in your life, Dr. Wright? Think literally. Why not put it in your book or remove something you've always wanted gone?
Slowly, Dr. Wright thought back to his teenage years and recalled an injury that he suffered in a mugging that damaged his leg and left him with a limp. He nervously used the pen to scribble out the words and sentences describing the event. After a few seconds, he felt a headache and suffered from a slight nosebleed. After that, the limp and pain from the injury was gone, and he could no longer recall the event.
You see, Dr. Wright, that's the secret of SCP-4001,
Dr. Henricks said with a mad gleam in his eye.
This library doesn't just let us read the history of humanity. It lets us write it. That's why you're here, to test the limit of this power and see what this library can do for the Foundation.
Dr. Henricks soon provided Dr. Wright with footage of some of the many tests conducted in the library, and what Dr. Wright saw amazed him. The books could rewrite the laws of nature with alarming speed, as some unfortunate D-Class personnel found out. D-0546 was brought into a room with a full head of hair. The D-Class personnel was instructed to scribble "lost all hair" into his book, and he soon started scratching his head as he rapidly started shedding hair. After less than 2 minutes, the man was completely bald. D-0567, a young woman who had been brutally injured when attacked by an escaping SCP, was bedridden and would never walk again, according to all the Foundation doctors. as the D-Class personnel used a pen to scribble over the line in her book describing her injury. Dr. Wright watched as she suffered a minor nosebleed, and then sat up, getting out of bed as if she had never been injured, and no longer remembered being attacked. Dr. Claire Williams, a Foundation researcher sick with cancer, wrote into the book about curing her symptoms, and then addressed the camera explaining that this was her third time altering her own book. Her lymphoma symptoms had returned after several months and 2 years, respectively, but it seemed that as long as she continued to make changes to her book, then she could keep the cancer at bay indefinitely. But not all the tests ended with positive results, as Dr. Wright moved on to another selection of tapes labeled mortality tests. A D-Class personnel who was given a fatal dose of drugs and then had their death erased from their book 45 minutes later miraculously returned to life, but showed significant cognitive deficits after. Another D-Class, an older woman killed in a containment breach, had her death erased from the book, but came back deeply disturbed. She survived 15 days in containment, repeating, "Send me back, let me go," over and over again before committing suicide. A D-Class personnel killed 28 days prior was brought back by writing "returned back to life" in their book, but died again just 13 minutes later from a cerebral hemorrhage. But it was the next tape that was the most disturbing. It documented a new book that was written by the Foundation, depicting the life of a fictional man down to the slightest detail. It was carefully placed in the correct position in the archives, resembling all the other books. And Dr. Wright watched the tape in amazement as the man resembling the fictional character created for the book spontaneously generated an SCP-4001. Almost immediately, the man started vomiting blood and died less than 2 minutes later. The book carefully described all the things he died from and stated that this was exactly as it was supposed to be. The fake book then disappeared into the archives, never to be seen again. The archive knew when it was being used to play with life and death, and it didn't want any part of it. The next tape wasn't a test at all. It was a video interview showing a Greek-speaking scientist speaking with an ancient-looking old man, found living in the archives slowly after its discovery by the Foundation. The man, who described himself as the Watcher of Alexandria Eternal, believed he was keeping the archives safe from the Roman Empire and the other invaders. He was unaware that thousands of years had passed since his watch began. He had been using the books to write himself another day of life, and to cure his ills ever since he began guarding the library. At the conclusion of the interview, he asked to leave, and this request was granted by the Foundation. The ancient man died of old age shortly after setting foot out of the library. While the library can't technically cure death, it does seem to have nearly limitless ability to prolong life, as long as someone is willing to stay close by and never forgets to write themselves another day. Where did this incredible power come from? An 05 authorized investigation into the origins of SCP-4001 revealed that under the archive's carpet is a concrete floor covered by a layer of ash. The ash was carbon dated to between 70 and 80,000 years old. And further analysis revealed the ash is likely to be the remains of burnt wood and paper, despite there being no known records within the archive itself about a major fire having occurred there. Dr. Wright didn't have much time to dwell on the library's great power of life, because he was suddenly shaken from his thoughts by the sound of alarms. Was the library being breached? No, it was Foundation officials, led by a man recognized as Dr. Lincoln Abrams, the very man who assigned him to this project, and he did not look happy. He explained that he knew what Dr. Waylon Henricks had been up to, writing in books, changing the lives of subordinates in an attempt to play God. He knew about everything, of course, because he had read Dr. Henricks' own book. He knew all of the doctor's secrets. He knew everything.
No! I'm so close, Dr. Abrams! I know I can crack the archive's rules! There's a way to conquer death here, I can feel it!
Dr. Abrams was done listening, and with a wave of his hand, Foundation security took Dr. Henricks into custody for a debriefing and likely demotion. Dr. Abrams then turned his attention to the new young researcher.
Dr. Wright, eventful first day, I gather. I'll appoint a new lead scientist shortly, but until then, don't disrupt anything. Remember, the archive is writing our stories as we speak. It's not very happy with Dr. Henricks. Make sure your story turns out better.
And with that, Dr. Abrams and his security team departed, leaving Dr. Herman Wright alone with the endless archives of Alexandria Eternal, wondering what would be written in his own tome, as the sound of new books popping into existence filled the air with ominous rustling.
You hear their footsteps coming down the halls. Or are those your own? Can you even tell the difference? You can tell they're getting closer and you can feel the hate, the rage. You turn, shaking, and finally see them standing right in front of you. But in that moment, you might as well be looking into a mirror. And who knows? Perhaps you are. You just don't seem to remember having so many reflections. Have you ever heard the saying, you are your own worst enemy? Of course, it isn't usually meant literally. But what if it was? What if you had to fight a monster that was you? All of your flaws are reflected back at you. Your strengths, your weaknesses, your deepest fears with no way to escape except a battle to the death. Either way, you're not making it out alive. It's just a matter of which version of you survives. But this isn't a thought experiment. No, according to the findings of the SCP Foundation, it's very much a reality. There is a place where this nightmare comes to life, and it's known as SCP-1919. SCP-1919 is a hotel and converted mansion built in the early 20th century. From the outside, it looks pretty much like it did when it was first built, and it almost looks like a comfortable place to stay, if you ignore the eastern side of the building that has sunk partially into the ground. The inside, however, is a different story, where it's clear the ravages of time have taken their toll. The floorboards and ceilings are rotting, collapsing in on themselves, and the rooms are filled with debris. It's deadly enough to explore the hotel for these reasons alone, but this is only the beginning of the danger for a person inside. In order to determine just how dangerous it is for either one person or group to enter the structure, the SCP Foundation planned a series of research expeditions into the abandoned building, led by Foundation scientist Dr. Lemkowitz. The first expedition seemed relatively normal, at least it did at the start. A 39-year-old Caucasian D-class male, known as D7, was sent into the structure with a camera and a communication system, guided remotely by Dr. Lemkowitz, or Dr. L, and another operative, a former head of the MTF Tau 11 Youth Hostiles, who is referred to in this file only as T11. When he arrived at the building, D7 was unable to get inside through the front door or windows. After several minutes of trial and error, he was finally able to get in through the western entrance. Dr. L picked up a strange, high-pitched whistling noise upon D7's entrance into the building, but it quickly faded away and was disregarded by T11. D7 discovered a torn painting, a portrait of a young woman with red hair. Next to the portrait, shallow scratches could be seen in the wall, the floor, and parts of the ceiling. Suddenly, D7 ducked into a hiding place alarmed. He and the other two operatives listening to his audio feed could hear heavy breathing, and it didn't belong to D7. Dr. L recommended that D7 evacuate the building at this sign of another entity inside, but T11 overruled, ordering him to disregard that instruction and continue his investigation. D7 was told to stay at a safe distance from whatever was inside with him and attempt to capture it on video. D7 turned off his flashlight in order to better hide, but T11 commanded that he turn it back on. Whatever was caught in the beam of light was difficult for the camera to see, but it threw D7 into a panic, and he began to run in the opposite direction. When prompted to explain what he saw, D7 simply said, "It was me." D7 ran through the dark, panting with fear and exertion. Unable to see where his feet were landing, he tripped over something and came crashing onto the ground, dropping the video camera. This allowed the observing officers to finally see what D7 was so frightened by, and it became clear just why D7 was so terrified. A man, identical looking to D7, approached from the end of the hallway, making its way towards the real D7. It was followed by another man who also resembled D7 and another, all running toward the original. They all looked exactly like him, with a few notable differences. They were dressed in the same uniform, with the same build and the same features, but each had something slightly off about him. One was missing eyelids, another had malformed hands, and the third had its lips fused together into a fleshy mass beneath its nose. Dr. L moved to cut the camera feed, but T11 demanded that it be kept running. D7 couldn't be seen by the camera, but the microphone picked up the sounds of flesh and cloth being torn, along with pained, panicked screams as the duplicates set upon him. After a moment, the screaming stopped. 2 hours later, the camera was broken, and the expedition brought to a troubling end. This was the Foundation's first glimpse at the creatures inside of SCP-1919, and it was not pretty. It did, however, allow them to begin understanding the nature of the building and what happens when a person goes inside. It appears that when a human enters the hotel, several humanoid creatures manifest throughout the building. These creatures look like the subject and are equipped with the same clothing or items that the subject brought inside with them. Though they are nearly mirror images of the subject, they are always slightly warped in a variety of ways. These have included changes to limb and digit length, joint mobility, sealed nostrils, lengthened jaws hanging loose and limp, missing eyelids, and lips that are fused together. These creatures are highly aggressive towards the structure of the building itself, as well as to the subject that they resemble. They do not, however, attack each other. They appear to operate with a hive mind, exhibiting swarm intelligence like that of an ant colony. Once they have been spawned by the entrance of a new person, they will not stop until said person either escapes the building or is killed. After the unfortunate end to the expedition, the Foundation prepped for a second trip inside. This time, 3 men were sent in with Dr. L's guidance, known as D3, D4, and D9. Video cameras were sewn into their clothes to leave their hands free and help avoid some of the issues that came up during the first expedition. This small team was sent in with the orders to terminate the remaining copies of D7 and further examine the hotel's interior. Upon opening the door to the building, they were immediately attacked by one of D7's copies, which D9 was able to quickly dispatch by firing his weapon at its head. Next, after a great deal of reluctance, the 3 men entered the building where they spotted something unusual inside. Dr. L was horrified when the camera feed revealed 17 discarded video cameras spread across the floor. They didn't have much time to react to this new discovery, however, because 2 doubles, one mirroring D7 and another mirroring D9, emerged from the wall and began to attack. Dr. L ordered the team to take shelter, then called the team of guards outside of the hotel's perimeter. They were ordered to begin an immediate full perimeter lockdown, preventing the doubles from leaving the hotel. D3, D4, and D9 attempted to make their way to a safe corner of the building, but found themselves met with a murderous double at every turn. At this point, Dr. L began to hear an unusual sound over the microphone feed, a high-pitched whine like that of a dentist drill. The operatives on the ground couldn't hear a thing, but on Dr. L's end, it was deafening. As the team proceeded deeper into the hotel, they became overcome with a strange feeling of foreboding. Dr. L ordered them to turn on their flashlights, but they refused and begged Dr. L to keep quiet. When prompted to explain, D9 said, "She can hear you." The operatives stopped responding, but their camera feeds caught a faint glowing white light coming from beneath a door. The door opened, and the light flooded the camera, making the images it captured hard to decipher. Just a few frames of a quick-moving female silhouette were captured before the cameras cut to static. The bodies of D3, D4, and D9 were never recovered, nor were their cameras. A third expedition was also sent into SCP-1919, but very little is known about what occurred during it. The video transcript is highly classified, and only those present for its events or approved to research SCP-1919 have access to it. An update to the SCP-1919 file following Expedition 3, though, indicates that new information was revealed about the hotel during the excursion. According to the file update, there is some kind of being at the center of the location, which is causing all of the other creatures, the doubles, to appear. The only information available about this being is the use of the word her in the official Foundation log about SCP-1919. This seems to match up with the last moments of the operatives in Expedition 2, when they told Dr. L that she can hear you, and the few frames of a female figure that were captured by their cameras. Nothing else is known that has been made available to anyone outside a very select few. Only the original report exists, and all other copies of it have been destroyed. The Foundation has undertaken special containment procedures to make sure that none of the entities from inside the hotel escape, whether they are the evil twins spawned by humans entering the building, or the mysterious female being at the center of the entire disturbing phenomenon. The Foundation has classified SCP-1919 as Euclid, and a 2-kilometer radius must be maintained around SCP-1919, with all roads leading to the building are blocked or diverted, so that no vehicles are able to reach it. This perimeter is guarded by a set of at least 40 armed and armored guards at any given time, as it has been determined that the doubles spawned by 1919 are equipped with whatever the human they are copying has. No one is allowed to enter the hotel with body armor or weapons of any kind. Anyone that approaches the perimeter that is not a part of an official expedition team will be immediately terminated. No new expedition teams are allowed to enter the building unless all doubles from the previous expedition have been exterminated. In the event that they cannot be exterminated, enough time must elapse between expeditions that the previous doubles have starved to death. Though they do not seem to feel hunger, the doubles do need to eat to survive, and will die when left alone for long enough. SCP-1919 has been sealed off from the rest of the world, so that no hapless civilians can wander inside and find themselves torn to pieces by warped images of themselves. But that comfort turns cold when you realize that the SCP Foundation still does not understand what causes these doubles to spawn. Is it scientific, supernatural, or something else? No one can be certain. Even more inexplicable is the entity at the center of all of this. An unknown female presence capable of wreaking frightening amounts of violence by turning victims' own images against them. What is the purpose of these funhouse mirror nightmares? Who is she? What is she? And what does she want? Currently, the doubles have shown no interest in leaving the hotel except to attack intruders. And thanks to that fact, as well as the reinforced perimeter outside, these copycats have not appeared outside of the building itself. But what happens if they do escape? Or if the entity that controls them decides to make her home elsewhere? There is no telling what could happen if this dark power is allowed to move beyond its current containment. Are you prepared to fight a vision of yourself, twisted almost beyond recognition, lunging after you with wide bulbous eyes, unnaturally long arms, and a distended jaw hanging down below its neck? Better hope you never have to find out.
It's an unusually calm moment in the SCP Foundation. No one is in the hall besides a scientist and a young female subject. There are no tests going on, just observation. The scientist calmly asks her questions as he escorts her down the hallway, hoping to get more insight into her unique abilities. So why does she look so utterly terrified? As the scientist tries to get her attention, the young woman becomes more preoccupied, staring nervously around the hallway. Does she fear the scientist? Why does she keep muttering strange phrases that don't make any sense? How did it break through such a heavy door? That door is nearly a foot thick. How did it manage to destroy it? The scientist is looking at his notes and tries to make sense of the young woman's statements when he notices something terrible. She's staring at one of the doors containing another highly dangerous SCP in top-of-the-line restraints, but it's safely locked away, right? The scientist swears he can hear the sound of scratching behind the steel door. It was 17 hours later when the dangerous SCP broke out of its containment cell and could have laid waste to the entire SCP containment facility if it wasn't for the heavily armed response team waiting outside to contain it and return it to its cell. The huge loss of life was only avoided because the SCP Foundation had advance warning, all thanks to the greatest secret weapon the Foundation has ever seen, SCP-187. But the Foundation's most powerful defense against dangerous SCPs is probably its most unlikely, a completely normal-looking young woman in her early 20s, whose only distinguishing characteristic is how thin and haunted she looks. Despite being no danger to anyone in the Foundation, she's one of the most carefully guarded SCPs in the facility to protect her from herself. SCP-187 is one of the most powerful precognitives ever found, but her abilities are a danger to her own mind. This average-looking girl has a unique telepathic ability where she can see into the future of whatever she's looking at, seeing it simultaneously in 2 frames of existence. She sees it as it is now, as well as what it will look like in the future. Say, for instance, she's looking at a baby tiger cub. Aw, cute. At the same time, she also sees the massive, fearsome jungle beast it'll become. She won't see minor changes to its state, so she won't be able to tell you how your next haircut will look. But if something drastic is about to happen to someone or something, she'll be able to predict it with perfect accuracy. There's only one problem. She can't turn it off. This involuntary ability goes off whenever she sees someone or something that's about to undergo a major change in its status. This means that at any time, she can be bombarded with horrible visuals, and that even includes food. Ever since her abilities kicked in, SCP-187 has been unable to eat normally because whatever she eats or drinks, she sees it in its future state. When she looks at a glass of water, she'll see it as a liquid, but a little more yellow than it usually is. As for solid food, she'll see it as what it comes out as after it's been digested. Not exactly appetizing, so for a while it looked like she was likely to starve herself to death in the Foundation's custody. Fortunately, the administration's scientists were able to find some workarounds around her ability. Feeding and hydrating her intravenously was an option, but further study of her abilities made clear that her power was processed through her eyes. That means that when she's blindfolded, she's able to eat without her precognition kicking in. Being assigned to the detail for SCP-187 is very different from most SCP details. If you're assigned to SCP-682, you're constantly worried that the horrible carnivorous beast with a hatred for all things human is going to get loose and tear you to shreds. Not so much with SCP-187. This duty is more like a medical team, where the patient is highly valuable to the institution and can't be allowed to get free or to harm themselves in any way. The Foundation has taken the highest precautions to ensure SCP-187 is safe, including a set of medical restraints that she's strapped into, except when out of her cell or participating in tests. Even when given more freedom, her hands are always in soft mittens, to keep her from trying to damage her own eyes as a way to neutralize her powers. Her team blindfolds her before every mealtime and feeds her with some mild sedatives added to her food to keep her calm. Through consistent care, she's starting to recover from her self-induced starvation. The personnel chosen for this assignment are carefully screened before being sent in to interact with her. They need to be the most responsible and detail-oriented members of the staff, who won't miss a thing when it comes to her care routine. Just because 187 is harmless doesn't mean she can't move fast, and one misstep could cost the Foundation their most valuable asset. And unlike most SCPs, 187 is rarely handled by D-Class personnel. They don't have access to higher security specimens, and they don't have the training due to their short tenure. But there's another reason the Foundation keeps 187 away from the lowest men on the totem pole. D-Class personnel are frequently used to test out dangerous SCPs, and are lucky if they get to end their service intact. When she was exposed to some D-Class personnel early in her stay, she saw them as horribly bloated, with holes in their heads, or missing half their body. Those unfortunate personnel soon met horrible fates, sucked out into the vacuum of space, shot while trying to escape, and bitten in half by an escaping anomalous creature. Additionally, while most D-Class personnel are amnesticized after their service, some are terminated for breaking protocol or trying to escape. SCP-187 would see any of these unfortunate personnel walking around as the corpses they'd wind up as. The Foundation wants to learn the full extent of her powers, though, and this means tests. Lots of tests. When she first came into the Foundation's care, they were focused on figuring out how her power worked. They gave her IQ tests, and she got every answer right on the written test. Her IQ was measured as being off the charts, at least 300, which would make her the smartest person alive. But her normal behavior didn't seem to match up with this level of superintelligence. Confusing them even more, when she was given a computerized IQ test, she scored slightly below average, with a score of 97. The scientists assigned to her case studied the results and created other tests, until they understood how her precognitive ability works. She can see the future of anything that's physically affected, so when an answer is marked down on a piece of paper, that's a notable change. But when an entry is typed into a computer, the computer remains the same. So her ability wasn't able to help her on the computerized tests. But her abilities could still help the Foundation, especially when it comes to improving security for other anomalies. She had inadvertently prevented the escape of an especially deadly SCP creature by predicting it would break through the door. But how would her powers manifest in more complicated cases? Some Foundation researchers postulated that she might be able to see into the future of deadly, indestructible anomalies like SCP-682 and figure out a way to eliminate it. But temporal experts warned this could create a paradox. After all, she would be looking at an elimination protocol that didn't exist until she looked at it. But her powers and how they might help in other ways other than neutralization warranted further exploration. So personnel were assigned, and the SCP-187 experiments began. SCP-162 is a horrible mass of fishhooks, wire, and other sharp implements. It exudes a psychological pull, and any unfortunate person who touches it winds up being pulled in by the barbed objects and absorbed into its mass. SCP-187 was kept at a safe distance and examined it, and was undisturbed. She saw it only as a pile of melted slag, indicating that it would be neutralized at some point. SCP-529, a normal and friendly cat except for the fact that its back half appears to be completely missing. The cat acts as if it's whole, and when SCP-187 was exposed to it, she didn't seem to notice anything wrong with the cat. She played with it briefly and seemed to be calmer than any other time she was examined. The Foundation is considering using SCP-529 as a motivating tool after she requested to revisit it. Other tasks had much more disturbing results, as SCP-187 discovered things about subjects that researchers were previously unaware of. SCP-003, a strange organic circuit board made of hair and nails attached to a stone tablet, appears to be an ancient machine. But when SCP-187 was introduced to it, she greeted it like a person and had a conversation with it as the staff looked on confused. When she was interviewed after, she described the entity as a very nice lady. What is SCP-003 evolving into? The Foundation is studying it closely thanks to SCP-187's advance warning. When exposed to SCP-015, a massive network of pipes that seems to be slowly growing and defends itself from any attempts to work on it with tools, SCP-187 observed few differences from its current state until she opened a door. Inside, she reported a massive network of pipes reaching for miles, with no end in sight. SCP-015 had been reduced to a manageable site, and its danger had been contained. But SCP-187 indicated that it may be getting ready for its biggest and most dangerous expansion yet. SCP-415, a seemingly normal human man with an ability to regenerate his internal organs, has been a subject of the Foundation's investigation since his arrival, particularly due to the strange physical alterations he underwent to make it easier to access his organs. He's one of the more peaceful SCPs at the Foundation, but as soon as SCP-187 was exposed to him, she became disturbed. She begged to be removed from the room, and upon interrogation revealed that she saw SCP-415 as a deceased corpse. What is going to happen to the seemingly immortal man? SCP-187 was also exposed to some of the more dangerous SCPs in the Foundation, including SCP-173, a seemingly living statue that moves in unpredictable ways whenever it isn't observed, and has been responsible for the deaths of many D-Class personnel who enter its enclosure for cleaning. But it seems to be stable in containment, so why, when exposed to it, did SCP-187 begin screaming immediately, have to be removed from the enclosure, and fall into a catatonic state for 2 days? She remembered nothing from the vision she had of the statue, and it took days for her to recover fully. The Foundation is keeping a close eye on the statue, even closer than they were before. SCP-106, also known as the Old Man, a depraved killer resembling an elderly rotting corpse, is known for its frequent escapes and sadistic attacks on anyone near it. When exposed to SCP-187, the observation lasted less than a minute before the Old Man attempted to escape. SCP-187 looked to be in direct danger from the Old Man, but he never touched her or harmed her in any way. When she was interviewed after, she explained that the Old Man wanted an audience, someone to watch it. The incident was recorded as a close call, and an indication that some of the other entities may have their own plans for SCP-187. SCP-187's power works without fail, and that tempts many people to try to use her to get answers to important questions. But they should be careful what they wish for, as one doctor found out during an examination.
SCP-187 looked at the woman's hand and observed that it was odd that she wasn't wearing her wedding ring. But the doctor was, and had been for the last 19 years. But the next day, her husband filed for divorce. And SCP-187's prophecies proved, once again, correct. So what are the future plans for SCP-187? The Foundation is being careful with her abilities, both to preserve her sanity and to prevent any potential time paradoxes. A routine has been established to keep her safe, fed, and protected from some of the worst effects of her ability. But the experiments using her visions aren't going to stop anytime soon. Many of her visions predicted dangerous new evolutions in Keter-class anomalies, giving the team time to prepare and up security measures. No one knows where SCP-187 came from, or what the source of her unique abilities is. But while the SCP Foundation is keeping some of the most dangerous entities in the world safely locked away, their most valuable asset may be one of the most harmless. Because as long as SCP-187 has her visions, the next breakout or apocalyptic event can be stopped in its tracks before it happens. Researchers at Foundation Site-202 were going about their day as they would normally, or as normal as a day could be in the SCP Foundation. If anything, normality was abnormal for them. It was a quiet day at Site-202, as it had been for a few weeks, to the distress of many of the researchers stationed at the site. No anomalies had breached containment in the past 20 days. There were no random anomalous events to investigate. Testing was up to date for all anomalies they had contained in the past few months, and their leads on potential anomalies had run dry. There was little to do at Site-202, and its researchers grew restless as the piles and piles of boring Foundation paperwork grew even taller. That was until a fateful day in the spring of 1990. It was March 22nd. The cold winter weather had still lingered in the air that day, but it was warming up for all the people living around the site. There was word that a school not too far from SCP-202 was experiencing an event that could only be described as potentially catastrophic to the SCP Foundation's reality. Of the researchers at Site-202, 5 were deemed suitable to form a temporary task force. The first, Dr. J. Alfred Henry, a senior researcher who was a former member of the mobile task force, the Mole Rats, during the investigation into SCP-1730, the interdimensional Site-13. Dr. Henry also brought along his assistant, researcher Tyler Zeisman. The next member was Yavan Olik, who was in charge of taking care of any living anomalies that may be present at the location. Another member of this team was Sprigend Firestarter, a former member of the anomalous group of interest, the Serpent's Hand, which specializes in magic and spellcasting. This project was overseen by Samantha Streisand, the director of Site-202. The team was not given a normal designation as most task forces are, a Greek letter and a number. Instead, they were called the Taint Team, and were in charge of documenting and combating any and all parts of reality that were tainted by the anomaly. The team set out for the location of this potential anomaly. Along with their standard issue firearms and tactical armor, they were armed with the portable Scranton reality anchors and possibly the most important part of their arsenal, their expertise. The location the Taint team arrived at was nothing they were expecting from what they had heard about past reality-altering anomalies. They were greeted with a single school building. It was large in size, more a castle than a school. It was constructed out of red bricks, with the roofs being slanted and white. In the center of the building complex was a large clock tower. The researchers commented how similar it looked to a nearby church and continued inside. They moved throughout the school, looking around for any sign of abnormalities. There were 3 floors and 2 wings, but all of them housed no anomaly. The portable Scranton reality anchors each member of the Taint team held were not picking up on any levels of reality instability. They were close to calling the investigation a false positive and moved back to Site-202 when a faint beeping noise was heard from all of the members of personnel. Dr. Olik was the only one not to react to the sound out of the team.
"It's just a meat processing plant," he said sternly. "There's nothing here except empty rooms and dust. Let's just head back."
The rest of the team was confused. A meat processing plant? They were all briefed numerous times that this was a school. Olik was the first one to comment that he recognized the location. Was this the reality-altering anomaly they were looking for? A school that made people think it's a meat processing plant? That wouldn't be the weirdest anomaly the Foundation has found. One side had a Yeti working for them, but this was rather underwhelming. "What do you mean a meat processing plant?" inquired Dr. Henry. "Whatever, let's just go," Oleg responded coldly. Dr. Henry stopped him as he turned and looked into his portable reality anchor. There was a rise in Humes on the other side of the main corridor on the first floor. Humes are a unit of reality stability. Baseline reality is located at a Hume level of 0. Anything or anyone with a Hume level greater than that is able to affect reality in various ways. The team moved slowly to the other side of this room, once again finding nothing except the white drywall and tile flooring of the building. There was one odd element as they approached this portion though. A door. It was not like any of the heavy steel doors the team had seen in the building. It was wooden, like the one you'd see on a house. The Hume reader skyrocketed. It was a number they had never seen before. 4,000 Humes. After a 10-second of looking at each other on what their next move should be, Dr. Henry slowly reached his hand out to the door and twisted the bronze handle as the rest of the team drew their weapons. He opened it quickly, finding nothing but a dusty staircase. The Hume reader plummeted back to normal levels as quickly as it had spiked. The team discussed what they should do next. They decided to enter the basement level, which they found was not listed on the floor plan of the building. Dr. Oleg insisted, however, that he remembered this meat processing plant having a basement. They moved into the dark stairway and slowly progressed down the stairs. It was an oddly short staircase that led to an oddly small room. The team was once again confused. Why did the Hume level hit a record high if there was nothing but a small boiler and a few pipes snaking out onto the walls? Dr. Oleg was notably absent from the team. After some searching, he was found a bit up the flight of stairs, frozen in place with fear.
"Yvonne!"
Dr. Henry called.
"What's wrong?"
There was no response, as Dr. Oleg just stood there frozen in shock. Then suddenly, the silent doctor began to walk down the steps almost robotically. His eyes were locked onto the boiler, but it didn't look like anything was wrong with it to the eyes of everyone else. Dr. Oleg entered the room with the rest of the team and moved towards the boiler.
"You don't see it?"
Oleg said.
The veins."
"What are you talking about?" Dr. Henry responded. "There's nothing wrong here." Researcher Zeisman moved towards Dr. Oleg in an attempt to calm him down. As he approached, Dr. Oleg became hostile and began fighting the researcher. The other members of the taint team attempted to calm and restrain the doctor, but Oleg thwarted these attempts and moved to the corner.
"Blood!"
Oleg cried.
"He wants blood! A lot of blood!"
Dr. Henry began frantically radioing Director Streisand in an attempt to get more help, but as he did, Oleg cried out the word blood another time. A gunshot rang out. His body fell to the ground, but his blood did not. The blood of Dr. Oleg began flowing up the walls in a jagged pattern, then began to absorb into the concrete. Suddenly, the Hume levels spiked in the room, and the blaring alarms of the portable reality anchors were all that could be heard. The room switched in appearance. Attached to all four walls on the basement were hundreds of long, thick veins. They were red and black and purple, and dripped a syrupy liquid of the same color onto the ground. There was almost a foot of the liquid in the room, which the agents had been standing in without even knowing it. There was a mass slithering towards the corpse of Dr. Oleg. It was black and a deep red in color. It almost looked like a person, but it didn't move or act like one. The entity absorbed the body of Dr. Oleg into its central mass and began moving towards the remaining members of the taint team. The Foundation personnel yelled into the walkies that they needed to be evacuated immediately. They sprinted up the stairs toward the roof and out of the building. Just as they reached the rooftop, they heard a terrifying guttural rumbling voice mutter the word "More!" Their reality anchor's Hume readers then plummeted back to normal levels, and a Foundation helicopter arrived to evacuate them from the rooftop. The Foundation would designate this anomaly as SCP-5633. They devised a number of containment procedures to combat the anomaly. Site-202 was to be used as a drainage facility for the anomaly's secretions, and all personnel who enter the basement of SCP-5633 must not have a phobia of blood. As with most anomalies, the SCP Foundation personnel of Site-202 decided to conduct testing under the belief that SCP-5633 could speak to them again. Blood used for transfusions at the Foundation was transported from Site-17 for the taint team to use as bait to attempt an interview. It has been over a month since the taint team had been to SCP-5633. They remained with 3 members despite losing 1 to the anomaly, as they were all familiar enough with the building. Dr. Henry placed down a bag of blood and readied his reality anchor. Immediately, the blood was drained out of the bag and began to flow up the walls of the basement. As Hume levels spiked, the room revealed its true form. The humanoid entity responded.
I am glad you know what to do.
Another bag was placed down.
You are now part of my creation.
It was decided that 2 bags would be placed next. Dr. Henry believed that more blood would potentially get a greater result.
You should follow every instruction I give you. You should give me blood each time, or I will stop giving you instructions.
Another 2 bags of blood were placed down, but this time no phrase was given from SCP-5633. Instead, a bundle of papers fell from one of the veins. It depicted the blueprints for Site-202. Whether this was a threat or a message, it did not matter to the personnel at Site-202 that was overseeing the project. They commanded that all of the Taint Team were to return to base at once. While the SCP Foundation has ways to combat reality-altering events, they also have methods to look at alternate realities. As SCP-5633 is one of these reality-bending anomalies, it was decided a much more in-depth investigation was needed. It was found that in an alternate timeline, SCP-5633 was a meat processing plant that suffered a reality alteration. The Taint Team in that reality had been trapped in the meat processing plant, only to fight and destroy SCP-5633. Somehow they were able to disconnect SCP-5633's control on them and the meat processing plant. Then overseeing researchers were able to attach SCP-5633 to various realities that were different from its own. It became confused and destroyed itself. Did the SCP Foundation of another reality accidentally send SCP-5633 to this reality? It seems that way. So perhaps this version of the SCP Foundation could contain it by sending it to another reality. Perhaps one that it didn't have power in it at all. The Taint Team decided that this was the course of action they would take. They reviewed the file they had recovered from the servers of an alternate reality, finding that blood was the correct sacrifice to give to SCP-5633. There was an issue though. The humanoid entity within SCP-5633 had been growing larger, along with its already intense power. Tests were being run on the substance found in the basement, as Site-202 had been draining and pumping it into a disposal and storage laboratory. It was found to be a mixture of blood and DNA from over 2,000 different human sources. There was a catastrophic accident with one of the drainage pipes in Site-202. One had been heated to intense temperatures, causing a potential meltdown of the entire site. On-site security and repair teams moved in swiftly to combat the issue. However, the superheating and rapid flooding led to the pipe bursting from shock, splattering everyone in its vicinity with SCP-5633's fluid. The fluid acted almost as an acid, burning away armor, clothes, skin, and muscle tissue, and embedded itself into the bodies of the victims. They were immediately placed into temporary containment, as at the time, it was unknown what would happen when the liquid entered the bloodstream. As always, tests were performed on the wounded. They found that the entirety of the DNA of those who had been victims of the liquid was instead reading as SCP-5633's DNA, not their own. For the time, the victims seemed fine. That was until a week later, when all the victims of this event were found dead in their cells, with cuts on their wrists and throats. Logically, this would be the most efficient way to drain the most amount of blood out of their bodies in the shortest period of time. The oddest part of this entire ordeal, there was no blood pooled on the ground whatsoever. There were only faintly red trails of blood up the walls of each cell. That same day, SCP-5633 was observed to have grown over twice in size. If the anomaly could affect people who are not even in the room, what's preventing it from spreading this liquid to all corners of the Earth and draining all of the human race's blood into its own mass? The Taint Team was given a supply of blood to draw SCP-5633 out, so that reality anchors could be placed and it could be sent to another reality. The plan was simple, with Dr. Henry and researcher Zeissman placing the blood bags down and communicating with the entity. Firestarter would place down 3 portable Scranton reality anchors to contain the entity for a time. The tank team journeyed to SCP-5633, this time accompanied by Director Streisand. The site director believed that all the deaths caused by SCP-5633 were at her hand, as she had more than enough time to intervene, but didn't. This time she was ready to send this anomaly out of her reality by any means necessary. The brick wall of the school had gone from a nostalgic reminder of elementary school to a nightmare of dead colleagues and the potential death of reality. They were careful when they entered, despite knowing SCP-5633 was located in the basement. Everyone on the team was tense, but they knew they had a mission in mind. They were ready to die in the dark, if that meant everyone could live in the light. With a swift hand, Dr. Henry opened the door to the basement, and the 3 other members of the taint team followed suit. The basement once again appeared to be normal. The team knew this was a false sense of security put in place by SCP-5633, so it could coil around them and drain their blood so it could grow in size and power. The first bag of blood was placed down, and the taint team was met with the voice of SCP-5633.
I like to lie.
The taint team was perplexed as the bag began to be drained of blood. What did SCP-5633 lie about? Another bag was placed on the ground, and Firestarter was commanded to wait.
My creation was always inherent. Your assistance was never necessary. I told you, if you helped me, you would be saved.
Dr. Henry, in a fit of confusion and rage, threw the rest of the bags to the ground. The only response he was given:
I am lying to you.
Suddenly, the Hume levels in the room spiked to 4,000. The room changed appearance again. Now, the taint team was almost drowning in SCP-5633's liquid. They tried to scream, but were only met with mouthfuls of the disgusting black and red mixture. As fast as the liquid appeared, it was gone, and so was the team. There was nothing but silence and the soft sound of slithering. Personnel at Site-202 realized about 1 hour later that something must have gone wrong with this investigation, and hastily traveled to SCP-5633. Over 50 members of various mobile task forces and security teams entered the school and its basement, only to be met with the disgustingly cruel fate of the taint team. SCP-5633 had reached a height of almost 20 feet. Dr. Henry's left arm and nose were seen floating in the middle of this mass. Half of Agent Firestarter's face was seen jutting out of what appeared to be the shoulder of SCP-5633. The legs of researcher Zeissman were found at the lower portion of the entity, laying completely still other than randomly twitching. The head of Director Streisand was peeking out of the top of SCP-5633. Her eyes had been completely replaced with SCP-5633's veins, and she appeared to be crying the liquid constantly. It seemed that SCP-5633 had been influencing events from the beginning, from the death of Dr. Olick to the pipe explosion, to possibly even creating the entire narrative of being kicked out of another universe by an alternate Foundation. The SCP Foundation does know one thing for sure though. SCP-5633 requires a great amount of blood, and it just so happens human beings have a lot of it. Salvation, Indiana was your typical Midwestern American town. The kind of place where everyone knew each other, where everyone was comfortable leaving their doors unlocked at night, where there was a sense of trust between neighbors that you couldn't find in a more populated area. The kind of place where word traveled fast, and where people talked about things that were improper in hushed voices behind the backs of others. In Salvation, being an outsider or deviating from the norm was akin to complete isolation. You either fit in or you got out, and if you didn't, Salvation had its ways of making you conform to the mold. Gossip, organized stalking efforts, discrimination. These small-town methods were often employed by the town's inner circle to keep those who they had a distaste for in check. And unfortunately, this cliquish mentality can be the norm when it comes to small towns. There's nothing anomalous about the ugliness of human nature. But Salvation did have its secrets, the kind that, if brought to light, would tear a small town apart. The kind that attracted the attention of the US government's Unusual Incidents Unit, a branch of the Federal Bureau of Investigation that dealt with the paranormal and supernatural. the US government's answer to the SCP Foundation. Between June 18th and June 23rd, 1976, the town of Salvation, Indiana underwent swaths of extreme anomalous activity that affected the town's entire population, but was mainly centered around Salvation's high school, appropriately named, well, Salvation High School. 2 UIU agents were dispatched to Salvation to assess the reports of anomalous activity, record it, and of course help cover it up. This was one of the few times the UIU got the jump on an anomalous incident before a larger, more prominent organization such as the SCP Foundation or the Global Occult Coalition. Bet they got a company pizza party for that one. The operation went smoothly, with the agents using an early amnestic labeled Chemical 110 to wipe the memories of the townsfolk after interviewing them. Although in later years, study of Chemical 110 would prove it to be incredibly dangerous, as the amnestic was both toxic and had a degrading, damaging effect on human memory centers. Between this and the Foundation's early amnestic models also proving to be incredibly dangerous, the 1970s were an interesting time indeed in the field of supernatural cover-up operations. The timeline of events the agents established depicted an eerie scene. It was only a few days, but what occurred was both horrifying and strange. On Sunday night, 10th grade students at Salvation High School reported hearing what they described as someone trying to speak under the ground while passing by the school on their way home from a church service. One student reported it to her mother, who ignored it entirely. On Monday, an 11th grade student of Salvation High School claimed during gym class that he could hear voices coming from underneath the school's pool. Several other students corroborated this story. When school officials came to investigate, they didn't find anything unusual, but the UIU agents found that the lining of the bottom of the pool was cracked. On the same day, several female students reported seeing faceless things instead of their own reflections in a bathroom mirror. They did not seem bothered by this. During lunch announcements, many students described being able to hear a third voice alongside the 2 other students speaking unintelligibly below the broadcast. Curiously, the agents found that the PA room, where the broadcast originated from, sat in a media center near the pool. On Tuesday, students arriving at school noticed that the Indiana state flag was more than 3 meters above the top of the flagpole, attached to nothing, just floating. The American flag was not found, and more importantly, the students claimed they could see 9 female figures hanging by ropes from the flagpole, who disappeared immediately after being seen. During a biology class, one student suddenly stood up and rolled their eyes to the back of their head. They descended suddenly into the floor and disappeared entirely. Shortly after, they reappeared above a ceiling panel in the center of the room. No other students were able to identify the student, and several of their classmates insisted that their actions were just a joke. The UIU agents were unable to find proof of the student's existence in Salvation's enrollment records. Similarly, students described yet another student they didn't recognize walking the halls of the high school. They were unable to define any details of their appearance, save for one thing that stood out. They wore a purple satchel with the word syncope embroidered on the side. A custodian reported seeing something staring at him, standing at the bottom of the school pool. On Wednesday, the horror only sped up, as school staff noted that there was a full 2 inches of water across all levels of the school. For whatever reason, the school's principal decided not to close the school. At 7:56 a.m., the entirety of the student body heard an unknown voice whisper the word "hello" in their right ear. Members of the school band realized their instruments no longer produced any sound, but whenever they played, they reported seeing a small, black, human-shaped entity flickering in and out of view in the corner of the room, facing the wall. One student saw a dark figure walking up and away from the school through the air at an impossible angle. Eventually, the figure disappeared from her sight and was never seen again. No other student addressed this. On Thursday, a student in gym class avoided a dodgeball as it phased through his body. He sunk into the floor screaming for help. Nobody who noticed seemed motivated enough to help him. The entire school shifted roughly 1 foot off of its foundations at 11 a.m. The vice principal, who was sent to inspect the building's integrity, described seeing something small with too many faces grinning at him from underneath the building before the school inexplicably resettled back to its original position. The boys' locker rooms disappeared and were replaced with what witnesses described as something that screamed. They were unable to provide any details. As students left for the day, they saw 9 young women hanging in the air, tilted forward at an angle above the school's parking lot. They could be silently mouthing words, and their appearances were described by witnesses as ugly and unremarkable. They vanished, and again the majority of the town residents reported hearing a child's voice say the word hello below them upon the figure's disappearance. A panic ensued, as town officials had no explanation for these events. Salvation's principal made the call to close the school on Friday. However, when Friday morning arrived, the entire student body showed up for school. The building was locked, so the students simply waited outside to be let in. No individuals could describe why they were there. There was a knock on a window, and the students saw a small black entity standing outside of a second-story classroom. An entity phased in and out of the school's windows over and over until suddenly disappearing. After this, the front door unlocked itself, and the mass gathering of students entered the building. However, what they found was unlike the small school they had come to know over the years. Inside, Salvation High School was transformed into a non-Euclidean space, meaning that reality didn't work inside it the way it should. Hallways that led right instead led downward. Stairs that went up instead curved left. As the students moved through the school, they couldn't help but feel like they were always moving down, lower and lower. Some heard whispers, others heard drums in the distance. As they approached the basement, they saw a massive stone archway. Suddenly, the students shifted, encasing the entire group in rock and earth for 20 seconds. After this brief, suffocating torture ended, the students reappeared back in the school, except this time, every one of them reported being the only one in the building. They described the experience wandering the building alone before coming to what they called a doorway below a doorway, and ended up inside a small sub-basement room. There they saw 3 mysterious visions. A woman crouched over a body of water, surrounded and covered in blood. A farmhouse and a group of trees that were burning. 9 white humanoid figures floating in the air overhead. A weeping woman digging in a field until her hands began to rot and fall apart. When these visions subsided, the black entity reappeared again. It whispered hello, and the group of students were suddenly surrounded by 9 screaming female figures. After this, the students reappeared inside their own homes. It was at this point that the UIU began to enter the town to distribute amnestics to the subjects. More anomalous activity was recorded in rapid succession. Bodies hanging in the sky, water taps leaking human hair and mucus instead of water. Individuals reported that their facial features had disappeared entirely. Others reported seeing faceless creatures in the town. The black entity frantically appearing and reappearing in rapid succession throughout the town. Even a weeping young woman running back into the school's building, who witnesses lost after she entered the school's basement. The cover-up effort was brutal, but it worked. The townspeople of Salvation were convinced that they saw hallucinations as a result of toxic gases blown south from a factory up north. But what was the connection between all the phenomena? 9 faceless female entities, water, and blood. Something that literally upsets the entire foundation of Salvation High School. A small black entity. Adults in the town ignoring the things their children saw and acting indifferent toward them. All this sounds a lot like a dirty, dark secret being unearthed in the town of Salvation. Something people would rather turn a blind eye to and ignore. But they couldn't, because the terror was only getting started. A week after these events occurred, contractors assessing the damage to the school discovered the sub-basement room, where the students had various visions of anomalous entities. Behind it was the entrance that led to the large stone archway. This antechamber was discovered after one of the members of the contracting team slipped and fell beneath a collapsed section of wall and floor that led to the massive area underneath the school. The contracting team attempted to extract them, but they did not succeed. Their disappearance caught the attention of the SCP Foundation, who assessed the school and deemed the area beneath the school to be anomalous, as the building's architecture should not be able to accommodate the size of the area. It was designated SCP-3935, and as the Foundation began investigating it, they were determined to uncover the truth of what really was occurring in Salvation, Indiana. While exploring SCP-3935, they came across the stone archway, a piece of architecture whose origins are unknown. Inscribed on the arch was a phrase that read, "The way below winds deeper, longer, unspeakable its patterns laid, the lost forever damned to wander, this thing a quiet madness made." After the initial establishment of SCP-3935 as an anomalous location, the Foundation poured deeper into Salvation's mystery and came across the documents created by the UIU agents. The Foundation, being much more thorough in their containment methods than the UIU, decided that the small town of 1,400 people was easy enough to relocate entirely, and the entire area could be condemned, feeding into the excuse of a hazardous waste facility nearby, leaking noxious gases into the town's water and air supply. With the townsfolk successfully relocated, Salvation was quarantined and cut off from the rest of the world. Roads were removed and rerouted, and Foundation personnel turned over any trespassers to local authorities. Salvation High School became a hub for Foundation researchers studying SCP-3935 and the events that occurred in the town, and the building was heavily guarded when not in use by the organization. The initial exploration attempt into SCP-3935 was conducted by a team of Foundation agents, shortly after members of the contracting team were lost. There was a slight hope they could be recovered, and the effort was dubbed a search and rescue mission. 3 agents, Ellis, Porter, and Haskell, were tasked with entering SCP-3935, all equipped with recording equipment and a shoulder-mounted lamp system. They entered a cramped, narrow space beyond the archway, where the subterranean stone walls got tighter and tighter, and the air felt stuffy and uneasy. On the walls, images resembling a child's drawings were carved into the rock. As the teams continued to push through the rock tunnel, they found it difficult to breathe. The walls were getting narrower, too close for comfort. Suddenly, Porter's voice cut out, and his camera feed went black. When it came back, it appeared to be looking up at 2 sources of light, most likely the other 2 agents' lamps, as Porter fell from a great distance. His screaming was heard on both the cameras and by the other agents, but they couldn't figure out where he was. Ellis and Haskell began to panic, moving faster and attempting to struggle forward. The rock tunnel was so tight, so constraining, that they were unable to move more than a few steps in a second. After a short period of time, both men fell forward into a larger open space. As they searched for Porter, who wasn't behind them, they came to the conclusion that he must have fallen into a ravine or slipped beneath the rocks. There was no other explanation for how he disappeared so suddenly, but their talk was cut short when they realized what was in front of them. They hadn't noticed it at first, but when they turned their lamps forward, they noticed a gigantic structure, seemingly carved out of stone. It resembled Salvation High School almost perfectly. The main entrance was visible, and the windows too, a stone replica of the school, hidden in this massive underground area. The agents couldn't believe it. There was a thick layer of fog in front of them, but they could make out a narrow stone bridge that extended across a large chasm, leading to the stone replica of the school. As they examined further, they noticed that underneath the school was another model of the school, and under that one was another. It went on indefinitely, extending deeper and deeper into the ground, in the direction that all things in Salvation seemed to go, down. On the other side of the bridge, hanging mid-air, were 9 female entities, their faces obscured by long white hair. The 2 agents stood still in fear. After a short time, the figures appeared 10 meters backwards, and then another 10, and then they appeared right in front of the door of the stone school structure. Slowly, they lifted their heads, revealing their featureless faces to the agents, who recoiled in fear. After that, they disappeared. The 2 agents debated going back for reinforcements, but they pushed onward after hearing the sudden sound of many voices speaking in hushed tones in the distance. It could have been the lost contractors, or their lost man, Porter. They entered the stone school and began searching. Inside, they couldn't make heads or tails of the architecture. As they ran down the hallways, following the sound of the voices, they noticed that the halls seemed to stretch on forever, but they didn't seem to notice the watching, featureless faces who observed the agents from the window panes in the doorways. As the agents came to the auditorium doorway, Agent Haskell let out a scream, and his voice recorder disconnected. At this point, what occurred became nearly impossible to make out on the Foundation's recording. The voices grew louder. Haskell's camera shifted perspective to the floor. 9 female entities appeared around Agent Ellis, contorting their bodies into impossible positions. Haskell ran, but the entities pursued him. He screamed for help. Eventually, the figures hung in the air, unmoving. Haskell slowed down too and slowly turned around, coming face to face with a small black humanoid entity sitting upside down on the ceiling of the hallway. It whispered one word, "Hello." The feed cut out to the choppy sounds of audio distortion. A snapping noise was heard, and then silence. And then all 3 agents' feeds returned. For the duration of the exploration recording, Haskell, Ellis, and Porter lost their minds in the depths of SCP-3935. In between periods of silence, they laughed, screamed, and shouted incoherently, rambling on about how dark it is and how they can't go down any further, below, where it goes on forever, where they can be part of the 9, be a part of salvation, where they can fall forever. And after that, silence. The feed was cut out completely, and neither the trio nor the contractors were ever recovered. After this failed horrifying exploration attempt, more anomalous activity occurred in the town during the Foundation's occupation. Sightings of the 9 faceless entities in the streets and the trees. An agent who saw the black figure constantly in his peripheral vision. Sounds coming from a grove of trees near the school, which led to a cabin and 9 corpses of former Salvation High School students in the backyard. But before they could investigate, the female entities appeared once more, and they were unable to locate the grove again. The Foundation's investigation of Salvation continued through the decades, interviewing former staff members of the school and residents. They were trying to piece together any semblance of a coherent story, to find a way to connect all these dissonant elements into something understandable. The black figure, the corpses, the buried secrets, and the 9 female entities. How did it all connect to the school? In 2002, a Foundation agent interviewed Mrs. Fletcher, an English teacher at Salvation High School during the period of anomalous activity in 1976. The interview started out ordinarily enough. Fletcher, in her old age, couldn't remember much. She remembered the town was quiet, with a tight-knit community. They didn't even need a police force because there was so little crime. She remembered students would go into the woods and chase ghosts, or claim they saw things, but it was never anything too strange. But as Fletcher continued to talk, she let her mind wander more and more. She recounted how there was a disappearance at the high school, a girl who was last seen by the school's pool. The town assumed she ran away. After all, there were some individuals who held strong opinions in Salvation, the kind of opinions that didn't sit right with some of the younger residents. The church was important in Salvation. Nearly everyone went. Fletcher opened up some more. There was a scandal, she recalled. A teenage girl on the school cheer team who ended up pregnant out of wedlock. She couldn't recall her name or what she looked like, but she remembered the town's inner circle was in an uproar about it. She didn't want them to know. She didn't want anyone to know. It was a secret she could barely keep from spreading. It must have been destroying her, Fletcher explained. She couldn't remember much about the girl, but she did remember that the girl would always say hello to her. Too many times, in fact. Eventually, the girl was found hanging in the woods, right outside of a log cabin. They found a note in her hand, which contained a drawing of a building that resembled the high school, and on its back, the repetition of the same word over and over again. But Fletcher couldn't recall what the word was. The Foundation agent was about to close the interview out, but he had one last thing to ask. He produced a picture of the unidentified 9 female figures that were haunting the town and showed it to Fletcher. She became noticeably pale and short of breath. "Do you know anything about this, Mrs. Fletcher?" the agent said. She collected herself and examined the image as best as she could, her hand shaking.
Why, yes I do. Those are, the cheerleaders. They were, well, let me think. There were 10 of them, though, I think. Unless something happened to one of them, there were definitely 10.
The Foundation didn't have to ask what happened to the 10th.
Dr. Zaretsky didn't remember falling. She'd hit her head on impact with the ground, hard enough to knock the immediate memory out of her brain, but not quite hard enough to remember everything else. The feeling of mushy fungal fingers wrapping around her waist, of rising rapidly into the air, the haze of deadly spores so thick in the air that they'd created a layer coating her hazmat suit. 5 meters. That's how far she'd fallen. About half the height of an Olympic diving board.
only there wasn't a pool at the bottom, and she'd landed badly. Dr. Zaretsky had been lying in her hospital bed for nearly a month. It was rare to have an encounter with a 30-meter-tall SCP go south and still live to tell the tale. She knew that as well as anyone, seeing colleagues dying in all kinds of ways around her for years. But try as she might, through all the broken bones, all the bruises and scars, and all the indignity that being bedridden in a hospital brought, she couldn't help but just feel sad. Were all these SCPs monsters? And what was happening to 5771 as she lay there, broken? It will be no surprise to many that the SCP Foundation monitors emergency service calls. Often, if there is a deadly creature on the loose, the first people to hear about it are emergency service operators. Whether they believe it is another case, something that benefits the Foundation greatly much of the time. That was how SCP-5771 was discovered. Bryce Wheeler, a junior agent not yet ready for fieldwork, was monitoring incoming 911 calls in California when a call pricked her interest. It wasn't so much the content of the call itself. It was in fact that there was a third call that morning where someone had died on the phone. As soon as the line connected, all that could be heard was wheezing and choking noises. The operator tried their best to reassure the person that help was on its way and that they were tracking the location of the call, but it seemed to provide little comfort. The choking noises stopped, and there was the familiar static thud of the phone and body falling to the ground. Then the line just sat open, totally silent. It made sense why the line was silent, as Agent Wheeler looked at the tracking data on where that call was coming from. It was a national park, the middle of nowhere. Chances were there wouldn't be any emergency services on the scene for a good hour at least. That gave the Foundation time to swing into action, diverting any emergency services in the area to other calls and creating sufficient confusion within the emergency services to file a couple of false response IDs so nobody would ever notice. That kind of thing was and is very standard procedure for the Foundation at this point. Since Wheeler had caught the call, she was given permission to ride along as they went to investigate. She only had one piece of intel to pass on to the senior agents as their SUV bumped its way through the national park. A choked word that all three callers had said, mushroom. They stopped about a kilometer out from where the call had come in from and got out of the car to see their first body of the day. There would be plenty more before the sun would go down that night. It was a hiker, early 20s, in good shape. They'd evidently collapsed on the trail. Lying face down, there was a small, drying pool of saliva in the dirt. Must have been coughing, too. Agent Wheeler was just about to go over to the body and roll it onto its back when one of the other agents put a hand on her shoulder. This was potentially a biohazard situation. They could not risk getting infected. They would proceed in the vehicle with caution. They passed 3 more bodies on the trail as they went. They reported each one back to the Foundation, who were in the process of setting up a perimeter around the national park and combing the outskirts looking for hikers for apprehension and medical help. Once they'd passed their 5th body, the driver stopped the car again. He was leaning forwards in his seat, peering up into the sky. Agent Wheeler tried her best to see what he and all the others were looking up at, but couldn't make it out. They were next to a little rocky canyon with a few trees sticking up out of the ground, most of them stripped nearly white by the heat of the sun. Actually, there was one tree that looked taller than the others, thinner too. As she leaned forward in the seat and her eyes saw more and more of the tree, she quickly realized it wasn't a tree at all. It was a pair of spindly legs, then a skeletal torso with gangly arms, then an elongated neck, and then a mushroom. Without thinking, Agent Wheeler opened the SUV's door and stepped out into the California heat. She was tiny in comparison to the creature before her, barely as tall as its ankle. Its whole body seemed to be soft and slightly wrinkled, just like the mushrooms you'd cook with at home. Her mouth fell wide open as she stared up at it, and to her surprise, it turned around and stared back. It didn't have eyes, a face, or any features at all. All there was a giant mushroom for a head, but somehow it seemed to see her. It leaned down and peered closely at her. The agents in the car were yelling something behind her, but she ignored them. There was something ancient about this creature, and yet something so young and innocent. She coughed. then coughed again. Tiny spores were floating through the air all around her. Within 3 minutes, Agent Wheeler's throat had totally closed off, full of fungal growths. The other agents tried to open fire on the creature, but were all dead just moments after she was, all choked to death. All told, the Foundation discovered 18 civilian bodies that day. Each was reported to their family as having died of other causes. No autopsies were allowed to be carried out. Anyone who claimed to have seen any kinds of mushrooms when interrogated that day were administered Class A amnestics. The containment perimeter quickly tightened as Foundation personnel moved in on this enormous mushroom man. With heavy weaponry at the ready, the Foundation surrounded the creature. It bent down on its approach with hands out by its sides. This was interpreted as an act of hostility, and the SCP was secured swiftly and without leniency. A special containment cell had to be constructed for the Mushroom Man, as it was far too tall for any standard cell. It was detained in an external holding area until the 32-meter-tall cell had completed construction. Once inside, the Foundation was able to get to work studying it. Designated SCP-5771, this SCP measures 30.48 meters in height. Its organic tissue seems to be made up entirely of a gargantuan fungal growth. The head of the creature resembles a mushroom of the Amanita pantherina species, also known as the panther cap mushroom. The body resembles a rudimentary humanoid skeleton. Samples taken from it have revealed that it is composed of the mushroom's stalk material, while the creature's thorax is made up of a ring of the fungus. It has a keen awareness of external stimuli, particularly living beings. A mouse in a cage was placed inside its cell for 1 hour. Unlike all of the humans exposed to SCP-5771 spores, the mouse did not die or suffer any form of fungal infection. What was more notable, however, was 5771's response to the mouse. Leaning in as close as it could, it appeared to stare at the mouse for the entire time that the mouse was in its cell, despite lacking eyes or any obvious sensory organs. Researchers noted an apparent air of curiosity about the tiny creature, or at the very least, a primitive interest. 5771 emits spores continuously. When it moved into its holding cell, the room filled with so many spores over the course of the week that it was difficult to even observe the creature through the cameras. It was determined that the cell would have to be cleaned twice a week. To ascertain how safe this would be, D-2304 was sent into the cell in a Level 2 hazmat suit. Within 3 minutes, the D-Class personnel was dead. It was decided that Level 4 hazmat suits were required, and since then, there have been no issues with infections of personnel from the spores. This is where Dr. Zaretsky came in. A keen mycologist with a background in studying the Cordyceps genus, she had leaped at the opportunity to study SCP-5771. A particular breakthrough came when communication was established with the Mushroom Man. Dr. Zaretsky had the idea of using biodata sonification to try to look for any microcurrent fluctuations in SCP-5771, the same ones that occur in non-anomalous living organisms. To her and the research team's surprise, as soon as the electrodes were inserted into the SCP's feet, a low, slow voice seemed to appear in the static noise of the computers.
Nature is friend. Nature is friend. Why?
Enthused by her breakthrough, Dr. Zaretsky set up an interview slot as soon as possible to talk to 5771. It appeared to have a limited vocabulary, but did not display any significant difficulties in understanding her. When asked where it came from, 5771 simply replied,
Nature.
When asked for further specifics, it was only able to add that it came from
Mother.
Keen to understand what its purpose was, Dr. Zaretsky changed tack, asking the mushroom giant why it had been born. Why was it here? What did it want? On the surface, it appeared to ignore the question, choosing to ask one of its own.
Why hurt Mother?
Taken slightly aback by this, the doctor tried to clarify what it meant by them hurting Mother. The creature was not referring to her specifically, but to humanity collectively. It appeared to use the words mother and nature fairly interchangeably, so Dr. Zaretsky asked if it was referring to climate change. 5771 seemed to confirm that, informing her that Mother was hurting, asking why humans wanted to hurt Mother. Taking the offensive, Zaretsky asked 5771 why it had hurt and killed so many people. to which it simply said,
Unintentional apologies.
It was then ascertained that the creature had no conscious control over the release of its deadly spores. Later assessment had also theorized that 5771 does not bend down towards humans as an attack to expose them to more spores, but is instead trying to make itself less intimidating. It spent much of the rest of the interview asking Dr. Zaretsky for forgiveness for its actions. The SCP seemed very keen to let her and the other researchers know that it never meant to hurt anybody, and even demonstrated remorse over its actions. In an attempt to reassure the SCP, who seemed to be growing more distressed by the minute, Zaretsky accepted the apology and said that they were friends. While it is difficult to tell if a mushroom is joyful, researchers generally agreed that it was the displayed emotion at hearing those words. And perhaps that was Dr. Zaretsky's big mistake. 5771, so happy to have made a friend, attempted to pick her up. Wrapping its fungal fingers around her torso, it lifted her straight off her feet and up into the air. Zaretsky screamed, taken aback completely and overcome with the fear of suffering the same fate as the 18 civilians in the national park. Realizing its mistake, the SCP dropped her from a height of 5 meters. She was rushed to the hospital with a broken left wrist, fractures in her left ankle, left arm, and left elbow, and some other minor sprain injuries. Out of action for 2 months, Dr. Zaretsky had no contact with the SCP as she lay in her hospital bed. Meanwhile, 5771 grew withdrawn. It would hunker down in the corner of its cell in an attempt to be as unthreatening as possible. Equipped with a proximity alarm, Dr. Danielle Baker took over the interview sessions. Asking sharp, direct questions, Dr. Baker tried to understand why SCP-5771 had attacked her colleague. The Mushroom Man, still crouched in the corner, apologized profusely. It referred to Zaretsky as friend, and repeatedly asked where she was with growing distress. Dr. Baker's interview technique in this session led her to be reprimanded by her supervisor. She pushed the questions hard, interrogating the creature as to why it had hurt the doctor. It was only when her supervisor stepped in that she relented, revealing that Zaretsky was alive and recovering well. As the interview concluded, 5771 had one request for the departing doctor:
Protect friend.
Fortunately, none of Dr. Zaretsky's injuries were serious. Within a few weeks, she was back in the cell with 5771, conducting another interview session. She barely entered the room and started to talk before the SCP interrupted her with cries of
Friend!
And many sincerely offered apologies for what it had done to her. The pair of them have conducted several interview sessions since, many of which have been left undocumented, as they contain little relevant data to help the Foundation understand this SCP or the wider world. Much of Zaretsky's conversations with the creature revolve around Mother. No matter Zaretsky's best efforts, 5771 seems unable to grasp why humans are hurting Mother. It uses the words burned, drowned, poisoned, and tortured to describe what is happening to Mother. It claims that this is the reason that it was created. Discussions between Dr. Zaretsky and her wider research team have concluded that SCP-5771 seems to have been created as a response to the climate crisis. Several have noted that the Gaia theory as a part of this finding, which claims that Earth is essentially one giant self-regulating organism called Gaia. Humans, plants, and animals all play roles equivalent to individual cells. If one group overpopulates and begins to harm Gaia, then the body as a whole takes steps to address the disturbance. SCP-5771 is theorized to be one of those steps being taken by Gaia, Mother Earth, Nature, or whichever title you prefer, in order to address the problem of man-made climate change. With the ability to empathize, communicate, and forgive, 5771 seems to be socially capable of encouraging behavioral changes in humans. Others have pointed out, much to Dr. Zaretsky's disdain, that 5771 is also highly lethal to humans, perhaps as a contingency measure to control population growth. Regardless, the Mushroom Man is to be kept within Foundation containment indefinitely. Interview sessions are ongoing, but it seems unlikely that this SCP could ever be in nature again, no matter how much Dr. Zaretsky advocates for it. Today, we're going to be taking a look at one of the odder SCPs in the Foundation's custody. The Foundation has plenty of weird and downright silly anomalies, as we've covered extensively in the past. Plenty of them are objects that you wouldn't imagine need to be under heavy containment, but you'd be wrong. Even innocuous household objects with a harmless albeit annoying anomaly can pose an immense danger to normalcy and human life. So today we're going to be taking a look at SCP-2966, affectionately and nervously referred to by scientists on break and at the water cooler with an odd nickname, the InfiniTP. TP, of course, refers to exactly what you're thinking of, toilet paper. Just based off that nickname, you've probably already gotten a pretty good idea of what this anomaly is, but you'd be surprised. Just because something is predictable doesn't mean it's harmless or easy to contain. SCP-2966 is contained at Outpost 117, a small isolated little facility far, far out in the icy tundras of northern Canada, well away from any other settlements or Foundation sites. It's kept so far away because of any other SCP objects coming into contact with SCP-2966 is incredibly dangerous and prohibited under any circumstances. It's also kept so far away from cities or towns for another reason. Below the ground, Outpost 117 is host to an experimental thorium nuclear reactor. Thorium reactors are highly efficient nuclear reactors, but only a few exist in the entire world for scientists to perform research on. What's one doing under a tiny, out-of-the-way facility in the Canadian wilderness? Well, all nuclear reactors produce a lot of heat and energy, as they're designed to. This reactor is right next to the containment chamber SCP-2966 is locked in, pumping heat into the chamber at incredibly high temperatures. SCP-2966 can only be removed for experimentation, study, or cleaning when enough heat has been pumped into the chamber to heavily reduce how much matter there is. But the SCP Foundation is in the business of containing anomalies, not destroying them like the GOC. Why would they be using nuclear power to slowly and constantly degrade what seems like a fairly innocuous anomaly? Well, clearly, it's not entirely innocuous. Outpost 117 staff is as bare bones as the facility itself. Only a single skeleton crew of 16 people. Just enough to keep the facility and its reactor up and running without risking any casualties. 3 nuclear engineers trained in the upkeep of nuclear reactors, and 4 Foundation researchers to monitor the reactor and SCP-2966 containment chamber. Along with that, there are 8 trained soldiers from the Foundation's MTFs to guard the facility and its perimeter 25 kilometers out from the outpost itself. But that's only 15 people. Who's the 16th? Well, unsurprisingly, it's a D-class subject, to be used for direct experimentation with the anomaly. Considering most SCP sites have personnel counts in the hundreds or even thousands, 16 seems remarkably little. But the Foundation has learned their lesson from past breach events involving SCP-2966. The D-class in the orange jumpsuit has an extremely important job. Every 8 hours, 3 times a day, the D-class is to use SCP-2966. Given what we know the anomaly is, you can imagine what that entails. But whenever it is used, at least 10 sheets of toilet paper have to be removed from it and, well, used. That use is heavily monitored by the research team, and a few of the MTF troopers and radio communication is maintained through the whole gross event. The research team advises the D-class on whether to speed up or slow down the rate at which they tear off paper from SCP-2966. There's other equipment too, a vast array of sensors and scales to measure SCP-2966 mass and density, and the data is fed back to the researchers and into the nuclear reactor's systems. Needless to say, all of this is extremely strange. What could a role of TP, infinite as it may be, possibly do to warrant a dedicated research team and nuclear reactor? Not to mention regular use experiments and constant monitoring of its data points. Whatever it is dangerous. The Foundation is currently constructing a runway for jet aircraft just outside of Outpost 117, so that personnel can evacuate should something go critical. Not the nuclear reactor, but SCP-2966. Clearly, whatever it can do, it is more worrisome than a nuclear reactor going into meltdown. We've got a lot of questions by now, so let's see if we can figure out what exactly SCP-2966 does. Our predictions from the name, however, were entirely accurate. SCP-2966 is an anomalous branded roll of toilet paper. For security reasons, we can't tell you the brand, but we can tell you that it's entirely possible SCP-2966 might have a distant cousin in your own bathroom. The first strange thing about SCP-2966 is its weight. It weighs at least several kilograms, though its weight is usually changing and Foundation personnel are told not to try reducing it, not after the incident. Anyway, it sticks around 5.5 kilograms. You'll notice that it's a lot heavier than you'd expect a toilet paper roll to be, given it's made of, well, paper. Its weight isn't the only unusual thing about it. It's also really good toilet paper, anomalously good even. We won't go into detail because I don't think anyone wants the details on that, but let's just say the best toilet paper you've ever used, SCP-2966 is softer, stronger, better in every way. But once a sheet is ripped out of SCP-2966 roll, it's not anomalous anymore. It can be used and thrown away normally. SCP-2966 itself is attached to the wall inside a metal housing, the kind you'd see in a public bathroom, with no way to remove or replace it. Not that it needs to be replaced. X-rays and ultrasounds of the metal housing are inconclusive, but the Foundation doesn't want to cut into it with saws because, well, you'll see. Not to mention the fact that the metal housing is the main way the reactor's heat is funneled into SCP-2966, and playing with nuclear power is a little risky. But what's actually anomalous about SCP-2966? Well, it's an infinite roll of toilet paper, but we knew that already. Since SCP-2966 was contained, at least 10 kilometers of toilet paper have been pulled from it, over 6 miles. The research team hasn't seen any evidence of it absorbing mass or producing new toilet paper, and testing has revealed it's not pulling the paper from an alternate dimension or reality. Despite all the testing, the researchers are baffled by how exactly SCP-2966 keeps producing the toilet paper that it does. But even if they don't understand how it happens, they have gained a pretty good understanding of what the results are. And the results are a lot less fun than you might think. See, SCP-2966 still obeys the first law of thermodynamics. Matter and energy can't be created or destroyed, only change forms. So SCP-2966 doesn't actually create toilet paper so much as it absorbs energy from its surroundings, then transforms that energy into matter, more specifically, toilet paper. How exactly it absorbs energy is unclear to the Foundation, but they've run the math. One sheet of SCP-2966 weighs approximately 3 grams, which means that approximately 2.04 times 10 to the 16th joules of energy, or roughly 65 tons of TNT, is needed for one sheet of SCP-2966 to be produced. From there, they were able to extrapolate that SCP-2966 contains at least several thousand sheets within the roll, an extremely large amount of explosive power, all contained in a roll of toilet paper. Now you get why SCP-2966 is so dangerous. It's not just a roll of toilet paper. In the wrong hands, it could be one of the most powerful explosives ever detonated, easily able to wipe out half a country. But if you think that's where SCP-2966 danger really lies, think again. Removing SCP-2966 sheets is harmless until you remove 10 of them at a time. Then it'll start absorbing the energy around it, at roughly the rate that the sheets are removed. It's trying to rapidly gain energy to rebuild itself, and it'll get the energy from anything. It's usually in the form of heat energy, but it will absorb anything, even sound. But when there's no active source of power, SCP-2966 becomes dangerous. It starts sucking up energy from the ambient heat around it, and given the large amount of energy, it sucks up fast. In only a few minutes, it can bring the temperature of the room it's in to absolute zero, completely stopping all molecular activity. This has happened twice when the power went out at Outpost 117. Both times the casualties were high. Research personnel sacrificed themselves to run into SCP-2966 chamber and start ripping sheets away from it, bringing the temperature down. They all died from hypothermia, but they saved the entire site and stopped SCP-2966 from going critical. You see, when SCP-2966 isn't used for a while, it starts to decay. The matter it's gained in the form of toilet paper is reduced back into pure energy, radiation. Thankfully, it's not ionizing radiation, the kind you'd find in a nuclear bomb. It's simple heat and alpha radiation, mostly harmless if you're equipped right. After extensive testing and more than a little trial and error, the researchers figured out the perfect distance between using SCP-2966 after letting it absorb energy and letting it decay into radiation: 8 hours. That's why the D-Class has to use SCP-2966 every 8 hours, because if it goes over, something very bad happens. SCP-2966 decays matter and energy exponentially, and gets faster and faster the longer it's left untouched. Within a day and a half, SCP-2966 goes critical, at which point the rate of energy radiation gets so high that it starts rapidly getting close to infinity. Sounds like a lot of complicated physics, right? So let's bring it down to terms all of us will understand. When the rate of energy decay becomes infinite, what happens is that SCP-2966's entire mass is converted into energy in a single moment. All that energy stockpile is released in one gigantic, titanic explosion. Remember how we mentioned that SCP-2966 could feasibly be used as a bomb? Yeah, this is that bomb exploding. The explosion would result in at least 1,000 megatons of TNT. For comparison, the Tsar Bomba, the Soviet mother of all bombs, had a yield of about 50 megatons. Needless to say, SCP-2966 going critical and exploding would very likely be an XK-class doomsday event. Aside from blowing up half of Canada, it would cause wildfires, tsunamis, and easily blanket the sky in ash and soot, choking out plant life. And that's all aside from the massive human casualties. The Foundation has long since realized that even though Outpost 117 is out of the way, SCP-2966 going off would be much, much more than even they could handle. Thus, the containment procedures currently in place. Keep SCP-2966 right in the sweet spot so that it doesn't need to absorb energy from people, but make sure it doesn't get enough energy that it decides today is a great day to extinguish human life as we know it. When SCP-2966 was being used by the D-Class, they noticed something a little odd. The D-Class, from the toilet on their radios, reported that the room temperature of the containment chamber seemed to drop a little. The researchers aren't quite sure of what this means yet, but the D-Class also reported that the paper removed from SCP-2966 is exceptionally comfortable, strong, and effective as toilet paper. A handful of the researchers submitted a proposal to remove sheets of toilet paper from SCP-2966 and re-roll them to send to other Foundation facilities. But due to the risk and possibility of accidentally creating another SCP-2966, the Council denied it out of hand. So now we've got a much better understanding of what the heck SCP-2966 is, and how a little roll of toilet paper could pose such a massive, overwhelming threat to not just the Foundation, but all human life, and why the containment procedures are as extensive and thought out as they are. The research teams at Outpost 117 are hard at work performing additional research on SCP-2966, but there are still big questions. Most importantly, how was this thing created? Who created it? And how did the Foundation get a hold of it and learn what it could do without accidentally detonating it? Well, SCP-2966 was discovered after global weather satellites noticed the temperature dropping in a small part of the Canadian wilderness. The Foundation, being tapped into the Global Information Network, also noticed and realized the temperature drop was anomalous. Agents in the area confirmed that something strange was going on, and Mobile Task Force Theta-19, the Rocketeers, found a small research facility named Pine Range Research out in the backwoods. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was how it was completely frozen over for an entire square kilometer, despite it being a warm summer day. The MTF measured the temperature, then rechecked it 3 more times to ensure they hadn't gone insane. The temperature was -108 degrees Celsius. For comparison, the coldest temperature ever recorded on Earth was -90 degrees Celsius. The research team are now able to say that the only reason everything wasn't at absolute zero was because the breach had happened hours ago, and the sun had time to warm everything up a little. The Mobile Task Force breached into the building and found a scene of devastation. All individuals in the building had been killed from hypothermia and exposure. As they went further in, they encountered a lecture hall, with one researcher giving a lecture to others holding SCP-2966. Because SCP-2966 had completely frozen everything, All the electronics in the building were corrupted, and the Foundation couldn't get any useful data. But the MTF did discover a handwritten journal by the researcher in one of the offices, and was able to recover small sections of text after thawing it. The journal was a small diary of research notes and daily happenings from the researcher. It detailed how the Pine Range Research Company had achieved a huge breakthrough in toilet paper technology. Their new, highly effective toilet paper formula was somehow infinite. The company had been experimenting with anomalies. They planned to monetize the product and even expand into other paper products. But a few weeks later, the researcher detailed how the project had hit what he called a minor setback. They weren't able to produce cellulose fibers making up the paper fast enough to make the roll truly infinite. It would eventually run out before restocking itself. But he had a solution in mind, though it was rare and expensive, using a halved isotope of the element hafnium, known as quaternium. Though the Foundation hasn't been able to find any other evidence of such an element, the researcher admitted that he was a botanist, not a physicist or chemist, but he was perfectly capable of understanding the research papers written by his colleagues on the matter. He claimed that in this day and age, anyone with a doctorate should be able to understand others' work, if they wrote it clearly enough. He was dead set on figuring out a way to make his project work. And work it did. The very next entry detailed how a metallic housing of the toilet paper was complete. The initial roll of toilet paper had been added in, and soon the quaternium alloy would be complete for insertion into something called the hyperbaric containment field. They were still running into issues here and there, particularly on the matter of the radiation that it was constantly emitting, but the researcher was confident that they wouldn't hamper the rest of the design. Unfortunately, from the frost damage, the remainder of that entry was rendered illegible. Another entry the Foundation was able to recover from the journal was dated to the day before they encountered the temperature drop in the Canadian interior. The researcher wrote about how the energy required for the production of radiation and from it, the toilet paper, was higher than he expected it to be from his calculations, but he wasn't worried, and planned to rework the calculations slightly differently. He didn't have time to walk it back for more extensive testing and modeling since the first test of the prototype was tomorrow. From what the entry read, he was excited that the world would never again need toilet paper. The rest of that page was filled with equations, only some of which the Foundation were able to decipher. But the Foundation mathematicians discovered what went wrong when they solved the equations by themselves. The researcher had made a very simple error early on when calculating E equals mc squared, which led to his entire work being thrown off and coming to a conclusion that the energy output wouldn't nearly be as high. Of course, the researcher was tragically and fatally incorrect. His desire to save the world from toilet paper shortages might have been prescient, given current events, but his lack of care and patience led to the deaths of him and all of his co-workers, and the creation of SCP-2966. The Foundation moved in and suppressed the event with a cover story of a burst liquid nitrogen tank, and amnestics were disseminated to any local witnesses. Since the Foundation couldn't safely move SCP-2966, they chose to convert Pine Range research to Outpost 117 and contain it where it was. But SCP-2966's story isn't quite done yet. Remember how I mentioned that Foundation personnel aren't allowed to try reducing SCP-2966's weight since the incident? Well, a few months after SCP-2966 was contained, an experiment was performed to see if SCP-2966's mass could be reduced if they pumped it full of energy while rapidly removing sheets. But SCP-2966 immediately went critical and exploded, albeit with a much lower yield than if it had been fully energized. Outpost 117 was completely destroyed, and all the staff were killed, though no civilians were harmed. But in the smoking crater, SCP-2966 was recovered unharmed and significantly lighter. Though the Foundation has rebuilt Outpost 117 and recontained SCP-2966, they've learned that simply letting it explode by itself is not a solution. This toilet paper just won't quit.
The diver screams a silent scream as the giant squid's beak digs into his skin, its many grasping tentacles grabbing him and holding him in place. Nearby, his fellow divers are driven half-mad with terror as they see mysterious figures floating towards them through the murk, and strange Russian voices speaking in their heads. Nobody can help them. They're down too deep, too consumed by the darkness and the pressure of the sea. they're now at the mercy of whatever is inside the submarine. Beginning in the 1940s, with the dawn of nuclear weapons, the American government conducting the world's first atomic weapons test, and the Soviet Union responding in kind with nuclear testing of their own, the two powers entered an arms race fueled by rivalry and a thirst to prove their strength on the world stage. What followed were decades of staggering technological advancements as each nation tried to outdo and intimidate the other. The Soviet Union crossed into the cold reaches of outer space, deploying the satellite Sputnik. The United States responded with the founding of NASA. Tensions reached a fever pitch during the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, as United States citizens feared they were teetering on the brink of nuclear war. In July of 1968, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States came together to sign the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, agreeing to abandon their pursuit of increasing nuclear power and turn their focus to disarmament. But several months before the treaty was signed, the Soviet government was dealing in weaponry far more dangerous than nuclear missiles, something the other world powers knew nothing about. These deadly secrets were hidden aboard a submarine known as SCP-741. SCP-741 is the underwater wreckage of a Soviet submarine that sank in March of 1968 and came into the custody of the SCP Foundation in 1999. The submarine, a version of the Charlie II class, was deployed under unusual circumstances, which attracted the attention of the United States government. In an attempt to learn more about the submarine, the US government launched Project Redacted, which attempted to recover the vessel from the ocean in the early 1970s. They managed to recover a few pieces of the vessel, though the specifics are highly classified. In the late 1990s, the US government contacted the SCP Foundation, informing them of a possible Euclid or Keter-class anomaly in the wreck. At this point, it passed into the custody and surveillance of the Foundation. The submarine is on the ocean floor, broken into 3 pieces. The hull was broken into bits during Project Redacted recovery attempt, but was largely intact when it first sank, except for 2 holes, one just in front of the sail and one just below the starboard missile tubes. Apparently, the vessel sank rapidly due to flooding after an enemy missile strike, which occurred while it was surfacing. Though all parts of the submarine are accounted for, no members of the crew have been located. Additionally, none of the emergency escape equipment on board has been used, raising further questions about what became of the crew. Wherever they went, they seem to have left something behind. Whenever divers are sent down to investigate the wreckage, they report experiencing anomalous currents and strange sea life, and hearing moans, disembodied voices, and incoherent whispering. They also report seeing blurry, faintly glowing figures. Additionally, the ocean life in the area is unnaturally aggressive, particularly large squid and sharks. This effect was first noted during a manned expedition into the waters around the wreckage, described in Incident Report 1741-A. Divers A-26 through A-30 embarked from the icebreaker Yamal into the waters below with the intention of studying the potential anomalous activity surrounding the wreckage. As the group of divers approached the submarine, they could feel the shift in the water around them, the oppressive feeling of abnormally increasing pressure bearing down and threatening to crush them. If their specialized diving equipment were to fail, they knew that that would be it, and the command would have to come and fish their corpses out of the water. Or even worse, they would vanish entirely, meeting the same mysterious fate as the crew of that doomed submarine. But they couldn't fixate on that. They had a job to do. At first glance, the wreckage appeared undisturbed, unchanged since the previous inspection. Still, they needed to take a closer look to be sure. As the team got closer to the vessel, A-30 was startled by the sight of movement from within the wreckage, spotting motion through one of the holes in the structure as something passed by. He pointed it out to his colleagues, but they dismissed it as likely a giant isopod or spider crab, which were crawling all over the surrounding area. A-30 laughed off his jumpiness, agreed that they were probably right, and continued the exploration as planned. Control authorized the divers to proceed to the next step, and A-29 activated sonar and lights, moving toward the starboard side breach. There, a faint glowing caught his eye. The glow resembled that of radioactive material, but when the team checked the radiation levels in the area, they remained stable. Whatever the source of the glow was, it wasn't radioactive. At this point, his neutron counter began to register something, and all of a sudden, a disembodied voice could be heard saying, "Vasily Yevgeny, can you hear me?" The voice was muffled, and though it could be heard over their communication channels, it emanated from somewhere in the wreckage, deep, deep underwater. As A-29 watched, a glowing shape emerged from the darkness. It was only an outline, the suggestion of a silhouette, but the shape was undeniably familiar. It looked like a person. The other divers quickly noted the apparition too and began to panic. Some checked their nitrogen levels, believing it to be some sort of nitrogen narcosis, while others pointed out that they couldn't all be suffering from nitrogen narcosis at the same time. The unknown voice continued speaking, saying, "Help me, it is getting hard to breathe." The divers debated what to do next, questioning whether what they were seeing was even real, when all at once, the humanoid figure vanished from sight. The divers attempted to shake off the startling encounter, and they resumed their duties, the investigation proceeding as normal. After a few moments of uneventful work, another interruption presented itself in the form of a 5-meter-long squid swimming around the wreckage. Its presence startled the divers at first, particularly those closest to the animal, but the others encouraged them to ignore it, citing the fact that there are no records of these squid attacking humans. So they did, continuing their work as the squids circled them with apparent curiosity. A-27 spotted an unusual shell below the wreckage, notably large and difficult to identify, and Control requested that they bring it up to the surface for further inspection by a marine biologist. The diver began attaching haul cables to the shell as the squid crept closer and closer. All of a sudden, A-26 screamed, and there was a sudden bloom of blood in the water. The squid, despite it being uncharacteristic behavior for its species, attacked the diver, biting him savagely. Prompted by cries for help from the diving team, Control began to reel A-26 back towards the surface, proceeding slowly to give him decompression time, and the squid took advantage of the slow retreat. It chased after the diver, grabbing hold of him and biting down again, tearing away at him as it gripped him in its tentacles. Still, Control continued reeling him in, hoping to free him from the squid's grasp as they yanked him to the surface. The other divers were ordered to get themselves out of there as fast as possible, an order they gladly obeyed. As they swam back to the surface, A-30 saw something else moving in the depths. He couldn't make out what it was, but the sight of it gave him a sick feeling of dread deep in the pit of his stomach. The 4 divers were recovered alive, along with the shell. Examination of the shell indicated that it resembled that of the extinct orthoconic nautiloids, but it was not fossilized. It was taken for further study, given the possible implication of extinct species anomalously manifesting in the vicinity of SCP-714. Diver A-26 lost a limb and was exposed to an unknown venom via bites from the attacking squid. His camera was destroyed in the process. As squid are not known to attack humans unprovoked, this behavior has been attributed to the influence of SCP-741, though the exact link between the two is yet to be determined. An anomalous pressure gradient surrounds the wreck with a radius of approximately 250 meters, starting around the center of the submarine. The pressure in this area is much greater than it should be, given the depth of the waters there. This unusually high pressure makes sonar analysis extremely difficult, as well as threatening the safety of any divers in the vicinity of the wreck. The few records that the Foundation has managed to obtain from the Russian and US governments indicate that the submarine was being used to transport some sort of secret cargo. Though the specifics of this cargo are still unknown, there is reason to believe that it differed from any type of nuclear or chemical weaponry. On a date redacted from official files, the SCPS Basisti was patrolling the area around SCP-741 when its sonar detected some unknown entity approaching SCP-741 from the south at a pace of 46 knots. The crew compared the acoustic signature of the contact with known submarines and torpedoes, but could not find a match. The Basisti attempted to reach the contact via sonobuoy drops and active sonar pings, but it did not respond. When the contact crossed into the total underwater exclusion zone, it became classified as hostile. At that point, the sonar recorded sounds of an undersea missile launch, and Basisti responded with the utmost urgency. The ship broke away from its original area and fired a Type 53 torpedo at the underwater threat. 15 seconds after the Basisti launched its torpedo, missiles of an unidentified configuration were seen breaking the water.
flying at a height of 1.8 meters and a velocity of 0.92 Mach. The missiles did not emit any detectable radar, nor did they respond to any launch chaff or flares from the Basisti. Both of the missiles were engaged by Basisti's 3KN-5 Kinsul surface-to-air missiles and Kashtan point defense systems, and were destroyed at 1,800 meters and 210 meters from impact, respectively. After the missiles were neutralized, the hostile vessel could be heard engaging in evasive maneuvers. At this point, there were 4 closely spaced explosions and the sound of a submarine disintegrating. The identity of the attacker, as well as its intention toward SCP-741, have not yet been determined. The incident resulted in the Foundation research team suggesting an expansion of the acoustic sensor net, as well as additional patrol and defense assets placed in the area. Additionally, they advised an acquisition of undersea retaliatory capability. The incident was classified Incident 1741-C. The sonar recordings from the SCPs Basisti during Incident 1741-C were taken for further analysis by the research team. The in-depth review revealed anomalous acoustic signatures that did not match up with any known forms of propulsion, including magneto-hydrodynamic drive. Currently, the nature of the unidentified attacker remains a mystery, and it has not been attributed to any particular government or organization. Following the incident involving the SCPs Basisti, an American intelligence agent reached out to the Foundation, offering further insight into the secretive government programs looking into SCP-741. He agreed to sit for an interview with a Foundation researcher assigned to the project, on the condition that his identity remain protected. The SCP researcher's name is absent from the official file as well. The two men sat in a Foundation interview room, and the interviewer asked his informant why he chose to come forward, given the US government had simply chosen to sit on this information for 30 years. You've seen those reports. Project Redacted. Nah, we know that part too. How the directors didn't make the connection is beyond me. That and the stuff the Redacted pulled up? Yeah, the other part you don't hear about is what some of the research team died of. And the crewmen we buried? Just uniforms. Also, the nuclear device we recovered wasn't a missile or torpedo warhead. It was a demolition charge. Does that make any sense? After all those clues, I had to come forward. Why the directorate didn't is something I can't fully explain. This particular statement puzzled the Foundation researcher, raising questions he hadn't anticipated. Only uniforms? Did this mean that the sub had been unmanned? The informant replied, No, not unmanned. There were no bodies, but personal effects were everywhere, along with uniforms. There was some blood, human. Before you ask, on one of the torpedoes and a bit of skin where somebody probably crushed his hand loading the thing. Just no bodies left. When I first looked into all this, I had no clue what the hell had gone on down there, but I started putting things together. The Foundation agent began to speculate based on the mounting evidence. Could it have been a Soviet weapons program? A deadly biological agent of some kind? No, it wasn't that. I thought maybe it could have been, so I dialed up some of my contacts at Biopreparant. Us spies wind up owing each other favors after a while, and they denied it vehemently. Not your usual cover-up baloney either. They clearly stated that whatever the sub was carrying, it wasn't theirs. They wanted no part of it. Sounded like he was gonna puke when I mentioned Redacted. Doctor, do you have any idea what it takes to make a bioweapons researcher sick? Now that wasn't what really bugged me though. What really kept me awake at night was the KGB file that fell into our hands. They mentioned a covert op by the Soviet military against an internal unnamed faction to get rid of a, quote, terrifying weapons that even the Soviet Union can't safely control. They wanted to lose it, whatever it was, or maybe fob it off onto the US. Of course, that all came to light right before the Iron Curtain fell. And given the atmosphere at the time, it was practically impossible to convince the directors that they weren't talking about nukes. And even once I did, they still didn't even think this was worthy of action. I mean, the Redacted would probably have me hanged for treason if they ever find me, but it was worth the risk. And by what I can gather, sounds like Russia thinks so too, loaning you half the Pacific Fleet and all. The interview continued after this point, but the rest of the conversation was considered irrelevant and stricken from the official file. The interview left the Foundation with more questions than answers, though they were more certain than ever that SCP-741 must be kept under strict containment procedures. Due to the object's location at the bottom of the sea, as well as the unusually elevated pressure around it, it is unlikely that many civilians will come into contact with it. However, as an extra protective measure, sonar and submersible monitoring is conducted on a periodic basis in order to verify that the wreckage has not been interfered with in any way. The Foundation contracted Russian warships, SCP Spasisti and Krasnoyarsk, has been selected for this purpose. If any unauthorized activity occurs in the area surrounding SCP-741, nuclear and conventional missiles may be deployed. Any movement of SCP-741 is grounds for an immediate nuclear strike. Whatever secrets SCP-741 holds, whatever it was transporting that was even more of an uncontrollable threat than nuclear warfare, they're better left alone down there, at the bottom of the sea. It had happened so suddenly. Only a moment ago, everything had been fine. Then the submarine had struck something, the crash causing the entire vessel to shake and ripple. Knocked over onto the floor, Vasily expected to see a horrifying wall of water rushing down the corridor towards him, ready to sweep him up and batter his bones against the K-122's innards. But there was no wave, no sudden all-consuming flood, just the dull pain of being thrown to the ground by the colossal shake. The submarine was intact, undamaged, although the crew aboard could hardly say the same. Sobol got to work tending the wounded. There were a few minor concussions, the occasional gash, nothing some antiseptic and gauze couldn't fix. What felt worse was the explosive fury of Captain Tarasokvich, at least to Vasily, who had to experience the worst of it. The submarine had hit a mountain. That was the obstruction that had been the cause of the crash. But it had landed First Officer Vasily Kestrov firmly in the crosshairs of Taraskovich's anger. He hurled obscenities with bile and fury in his voice, called Vasily incompetent, and accused him of being ungrateful to have his position. It had been his old friend Captain Tarasokvich who secured Vasily the role of First Officer. He stood there and accepted the relentless punishment. Even as Taraskovich, a man he admired as a leader, verbally tore into him, Kestrov held his tongue. He knew there was a problem here. Something was not right. He checked the maps thoroughly, could have even cited their present coordinates off the top of his head just by guessing, and probably be exactly right. And he knew there should have been nothing around them but open water. There was no mountain. But the question was, what had the submarine just hit? Vasily had never bought into all the stories about the submarine. He'd been warned by friends after he accepted the position aboard the K-122 that there had been incidents on board. Even when he met his old friend Dmitry Teskovich to accept the role of First Officer, the decorated Soviet captain had even made jokes about the sub's reputation as being cursed. Vasily had heard rumors before that several of the workers constructing the K-122 were injured, or a few were maybe killed by a freak accident. The exact details of the stories seemed entirely dependent on the person that was telling it. Things were often changed, reordered, embellished. One of Vasily's friends, in a vodka-soaked ramble, had claimed the entire construction team had died while working on the K-122, attributing the supposed deaths to witches, black magic, the Baba Yaga, and all other manner of superstitions. He'd called it a bad omen that Vasily had been asked by Taraskovich to serve on the crew. The captain himself had a different version. He half-heartedly joked about some sudden accidents that took place, how it made some of the workforce grow paranoid. Some heard voices or had hallucinations. Others were sleepless for weeks. Of course they would be, Taraskovich had joked. What else could they expect from working nights? Vasily had remembered not finding the joke very funny, but still he made sure the captain could hear his laugh. He had no idea just how bad things really were. The Kremlin had gone to great lengths to hide the full details of the K-122's troubled production. None of the crew stationed on the sub had any clue that the accidents that befell the construction workers should have been impossible. And certainly nobody on board was aware that the workforce had mysteriously disappeared once the K-122 was completed, each of them taken in the night after a suspicious knock at the door, those who had still been alive, at least. Adapting to the sudden change that was his new position proved jarring for Vasily Kestrov. He'd been just another soldier in the naval infantry before Captain Taraskovich had pulled the necessary strings to have him transferred to the K-122. Now he was faced with the pressure of not only the responsibility of being first officer, but also the expectations that came from continuing his family's generations-long naval tradition. He was under no illustrations that he'd sign on to a difficult post, but little could have prepared him for what he'd encounter in the cramped confines of the K-122. When the submarine made its initial departure, setting out on its maiden voyage, a champagne bottle was swung towards the K-122 to mark its launch. The bottle did not break, a foreboding omen of what was to come. Despite sharing the tight environment inside the sub with 150 other men, the prospect of being so deep underwater, charting courses through parts of the ocean untouched by human beings, was exciting to Vasily. Or it would have been if he could actually see the vast ocean around him. There were no portholes, just over 100 crew crammed together. Yet, strangely though, he'd read through the manifests. Vasily kept encountering new members of the crew whose names he did not recognize from the documents. Sometimes it felt like they appeared out of nowhere. He chalked it up to his inexperience as first officer, and assured that over time it'd be easier to keep track of who was aboard the sub. 5 days after their departure, on June 5, 1963, Captain Teraskovich received new orders from command, causing the K-122 to change course. They had been crossing the North Atlantic when word came through that the submarine needed to reach a spot off the coast of Nova Scotia, all the way on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. Vasily found it strange that they would be deployed there. After all, Canada was hardly considered a threat to the motherland. Vasily wasn't even sure they had nuclear weapons yet. Something about the mission felt off, wrong. It didn't add up, and the lack of sense gnawed at the newly appointed first officer so much that he queried it with Teraskovich. But the sub-captain refused to explain why. The order had come direct from the Kremlin. That was all he'd said. The information was need to know only. Within a day of the new orders from Moscow, one of the men, Melnik, suddenly came down with a strange fever. The sub's onboard medic, Dr. Sobel, did his best to treat the rapidly onset illness. However, nobody could figure out what had happened to Melnik. One day, he'd been fine. The next, he was insisting he could see outside the K-122 into the water, as if he'd somehow managed to hallucinate portholes. Vasily couldn't begin to understand what was wrong with this man, but raised it with Teraskovich anyway. The captain seemed indifferent, insisting that Melnik's condition wasn't an issue, and to keep him isolated in the medical bay. The next day, the same fever seemed to have spread to more of the crew. Another, Petrov, had also fallen sick, with symptoms that almost matched Melnik's, except far more disturbing. He claimed to be hearing voices coming from outside the sub, as if there was someone speaking to him through the ocean. As if that wasn't unsettling enough. Something Petrov said stuck with Vasily 4 hours after. The crewman claimed that when he had glimpses of the ocean around them, just like Melnik had, he said he had seen bodies in the water. Through his worry, Vasily tried desperately to find a rational explanation. He thought perhaps Petrov had overheard what Melnik said about his hallucinations, and it had made him paranoid. But a voice right at the back of the first officer's mind wondered if maybe his fellow crewmen were right, and that there really was something out there in the uncharted depths of the ocean. Once again, Vasily's pleas with Teraskovich to do something fell on deaf ears. The pressure to carry out the Kremlin's orders were clearly weighing on them, and at one point caused them to crack. The captain, who normally kept a level head, yelled furiously at Dr. Sobel, demanding that he do his job and cure Melnik and Petrov of whatever was making them hallucinate. In the 2 long decades he'd known the man, Vasily had never heard Teraskovich shout like that at anyone. It was clear that whatever the Kremlin was ordering of K-122, it had been taking a heavy toll on the submarine's senior officer. That night, Vasily started to hear voices too, a whispering sound right in his ear while he slept, although he couldn't decipher what it was saying. Suddenly, a panicked Dr. Sobel arrived at his cabin, telling the first officer about Melnik and Petrov. Vasily tried to rally the rest of the crew to help search for the men now missing from the medbay, but Captain Teraskovich kept undermining his orders, as if he didn't care about the missing men. They found Petrov's body in the torpedo bay. Somehow he'd lifted a pistol from one of the officers. It had all gotten too much for him. Melnik was nowhere to be found. There was no possible way he could have jumped overboard from a submarine deep beneath the surface of the ocean, unless he had put himself inside the torpedo tube. The next day, Tereshkovich called Vasily into his office and explained the true content of the orders the K-122 had received. The Kremlin's and the entire sub's crew worst fears had been realized. It had happened. America had fired a nuclear missile directly at Moscow, reducing the Russian capital to an irradiated wasteland. The orders received by Captain Tereshkovich were to retaliate, firing one of the K-122's nuclear payloads at the United States. Amidst the surrealness of it all, the details still bothered Vasily. Why was the submarine approaching Canada? The captain insisted that it was the best launch point, but the first officer felt it would make more sense to be approaching the coast of America. After the collision with the mountain that was not there, Tereshkovich forbade Vasily from telling the rest of the crew that Russia was gone, and that there was nothing left of their homes anymore. But Vasily started to doubt the story. There were no signs of radiation outside the sub's own reactor. The currents of the ocean seemed unaffected despite the supposed nuclear blast. Vasily and the rest of the crew were feeling increasingly on edge, and Tereshkovich was refusing to listen to the first officer. Whatever had affected the two others seemed to be gradually taking hold of the other crew, more of them saying there was something wrong, that there was some force outside the submarine watching them. Then the subject of conversation turned to relieving Captain Tereshkovich of his command. Despite Vasily's intention to restrain the captain and return the ship to the motherland, Tereshkovich refused to let this happen without bloodshed. When one of the men, Orlov, explained the feelings and concerns shared by the rest of the crew, Tereshkovich shot him on the spot. A mutiny erupted, with the captain executing 5 more of the men before turning the gun to Vasily, calling him a traitor. But before he could fire, the lights on the K-122 went out. Vasily ran away, finding Zima, another crewman who gave him a flashlight. It was then the first officer noticed it wasn't just dark, it was silent. The normal sounds of the sub that Vasily had grown so accustomed to were gone. The surviving crew were all scared, confused, and unable to repair the vital systems aboard the K-122. In fact, none of them seemed broken at all. The engines, the reactor, everything was in perfect working condition, without so much as a scratch. Yet the submarine was dead in the water. Vasily and the rest of the crew spent days hiding from Tereshkovich, many contracting the same fever and perishing, while others struggled to survive on meager rations. Every time they tried to reach the bridge where they'd previously seen the homicidal captain, they found themselves in the wrong room, as if the layout of the K-122 was somehow being changed in order to redirect them. Then, after 2 days, as if by some force of miracle, the submarine systems seemed to reactivate on their own. But this was far from a return to normality. Confronting Tereshkovich, Vasily and Zima learned the truth. An American destroyer was detected above the K-122 on a regular patrol route. The captain had lied to them. There had been no war, no nuclear attack. Despite being their enemies, the US boat was the first sign of someone who could help the trapped men. But Tereshkovich treated it as an act of treason against the Soviet Union. To make an example of him, he forced Zima into the torpedo tube for trying to contact the American ship and made the captive crew watch as he engaged the launch sequence. In that moment, when Tereshkovich's back was turned, Vasily swung a wrench, killing the captain on the spot. After the K-122 resurfaced and the surviving crew aboard were rescued, Vasily took full responsibility for Captain Tereshkovich's death. The KGB heard his retelling of events. Both the anomalous occurrences were dismissed. Vasily Kestrov was facing charges of anti-Soviet activity and the murder of a decorated naval officer. But the KGB's own anomalous subdivision, GRU Division P, stepped in to have the first officer Kestrov quietly exonerated. The SCP Foundation have since obtained records from GRU Division P that have offered insight into what exactly happened aboard the submarine K-122. Photographs of the sub, official documentation detailing its deployment, as well as its maintenance and construction logs, all indicate there was no discernible difference between the K-122 and other submarines of the same model from the same time. However, for reasons that even the Foundation's top researchers can't discern, an unknown anomaly was somehow connected to the K-122. While its exact nature is unknown, the anomaly, along with the affected submarine, have been designated as SCP-7242. From what little can be gleaned from various eyewitness accounts, SCP-7242 resulted in a mimetic effect among human beings. which seemed to influence the minds of its crew, causing the incidents detailed in Vasily Kestrov's diary. Principal among them was causing the crew members to experience visual and auditory hallucinations, as well as having their memories altered in such a way that made the men aboard the K-122 highly susceptible to being manipulated. However, what SCP-7242 seemed unable to do was actually control the submarine itself. It had a limited effect over the various essential systems that kept the K-122 operational, and any and all machines aboard would function as normal. Some researchers have theorized that SCP-7242 was only triggered while the vessel was submerged, but without access to complete Division P records or the K-122 itself, the Foundation are left to speculate with no solid answers. The full extent of anomalous occurrences aboard the K-122 have been expunged from any available Soviet naval records thanks to the work of GRU Division P. Although official records from GRU-P indicate that the K-122 was decommissioned as a result of damage sustained on its maiden voyage, in actuality it was retrieved and taken to an undisclosed location for further research. The results of the GRU-P's findings have all been expunged, and the present location and eventual fate of the K-122 remains unknown to the Foundation.
Every so often, the Foundation gets a tip-off about an anomalous object rather than discovering it through their global surveillance network. Tip-offs aren't common because few people know how to even get in contact with the Foundation directly, but when they do, it's always a relief. The agents and mobile task forces that are sent to investigate and retrieve possible SCPs usually walk in blind. There's no telling what they might find. But when a tip-off, report, or informant from one of the groups of interest comes in and spills the beans, the brave frontliners of the Foundation usually have a slightly better idea of what they're tackling. Usually. Sometimes they get complacent and end up underestimating or going in unprepared. And when that happens, well, the consequences can be disastrous. Way back in 1990, the Foundation received an unexpected tip-off from some of its contacts based on the island of Hong Kong. It wasn't much, just a location and a general description of the effects told discreetly over the phone. The contact was one of some 50,000 Chinese residents of a particular neighborhood in Hong Kong, the infamous Kowloon Walled City. The city was originally a Chinese military fort on the island of Hong Kong. When the island was sold to the British Empire at the end of the 19th century, the fort was converted into massive, densely packed apartment buildings and quickly became an enclave for the Chinese. When Japan occupied Hong Kong during World War II, tens of thousands of ethnic Chinese on the island took refuge in the massive apartment blocks of the slum. There was no government, no police, no laws. The dozens of floors were controlled by gangs and drug dealers, but it was better than being homeless. And of course, the residents were incredibly suspicious of any authorities. You can imagine why the Foundation was reticent to send some of their best men into a densely packed civilian area that was likely to be hostile to their presence. Their contact informed them that the anomalous object was a small relic of some kind, with strange, terrifying powers. It was located deep in the heart of the walled city, and it might even be responsible for the very city's existence. Foundation Command considered that the alternative was letting 50,000 people reside inside of an uncontained anomaly, and decided they'd send someone to investigate. They picked troops from Mobile Task Force Zeta-9, the Mole Rats. The Mole Rats are some of the Foundation's most trustworthy operatives. They're a task force specially trained and equipped to operate in dangerous and anomalous environments, particularly those that are underground or underwater. Whether it's an undersea cave system or an endless claustrophobic basement, the Mole Rats perform search, rescue, containment, and even recovery in these terrifying places. They seem like the natural fit to be the ones to lead the expedition, while exploring and finding out what in the world had caused the Kowloon Walled City. The team landed in Hong Kong on June 3rd, led by one Gordon Richards, a member of Zeta-9. He kept an extensive personal diary, as most agents do, and from it, the Foundation was able to learn what SCP-184 truly was.
The first impression Richards had of the walled city while exploring it with his partner Henry was pure disgust. It was a densely packed slum that was largely made of trash and refuse, covered in filth and stinking to high heaven. The suits that the team wore protected them from any hazardous material or danger, but it was still a vile experience moving through the cramped streets and corridors of the ghetto. At one point, Richard's partner was walking through an area piled knee-deep in trash when the floor gave out, dumping him into a cesspool. On their first day, they learned practically nothing from the locals. The residents of the walled city were suspicious of outsiders. They'd either avoid the agents or throw trash and insults at them from afar in Cantonese and sometimes Mandarin. But Richards did manage to catch whispers in some of the bars that peppered the city. There was something strange in the center of the mass, something that sounded nothing short of anomalous. Foundation agents assisted Hong Kong police officers in conducting raids overnight, hoping to find more information. In the morning, the mole rats returned to investigate and found the first evidence of something actually anomalous affecting several of the tiny apartments. From the outside, they looked like the same ragged shanties as the other 100-square-foot apartments, but they were far too big from the inside. Henry had seemed spooked since his fall into the cesspit the day prior. The other agents tried talking to him, but it didn't help much, and he spent most of the day in a strange fugue, muttering to himself. Richards told him to knock it off, but never reported it, feeling bad for the new kid. The next day would be spent in the sewers, trying to find a direct route to the center of the city, where the object was being held. Richards went into the sewer with a fellow agent, but found nothing except more waste and filth. They were unable to get on the radio with the rest of the team inside the actual building until they came out early the next day, after spending almost a full day underground. They were quickly pulled out by other agents and briefed while they had been in the sewers. Henry and another agent had been exploring the central portion of the city. That's when they were rushed by an angry mob. Dozens of people attacked before they even had a chance to retaliate. Both were viciously beaten, but Henry was dragged off deeper into the city, and the other agent was injured during his retreat back to base. When they could no longer hear Henry's screams on the radio, several armed agents rushed in to extract him. That's when they heard Henry's radio again. He was screaming and rambling incoherently, sounding like he was hallucinating about the city being alive when the radio cut out again. The search team was shocked by the sight of Henry rounding the corner, running at full pace and screaming without his helmet. He pushed an agent aside before smashing right through one of the weak, thin garbage walls, falling 6 stories onto a pile of metal scrap. The sight was gruesome, and it took them hours to recover his body. Zeta 9 was done screwing around. They were going to round up the city's leaders and find this anomaly before it killed anyone else. Over the next day or so, the agents, aided by the Hong Kong Police Department, rounded up many of the city's elders and community leaders, pulling them from their apartments and shanties. Zeta 9 worked on interrogating them for information, while Richards provided the muscle. The first person they pulled was a member of the Chinese Triads, one of the gangs that functionally ran the city. When he didn't cooperate, the agents broke his legs, and he suddenly became a lot more talkative. He explained that the anomaly was called the Builder, and no one quite knew where it came from or how it worked. The closest he had ever come was standing guard outside rooms while it worked, and that the city elders would know more. When he brushed off Henry's death, Richards broke his jaw. The next person was an ancient-looking Chinese man named Long Wen, one of the city's reclusive elders. He was indomitable. No matter what Richards did, he wouldn't give in under abuse or torture. But when one of the agents suggested that Zeta 9 pay a visit to his family, he immediately opened up. He told them that the Builder was kept in an old temple that the city had grown around. It was highly secret, and only a few people could look upon it without going mad. He had tried to show Henry so that the Foundation wouldn't take it away, but obviously that hadn't gone quite as planned. When asked where it was, Long Wen explained that as soon as the agents had arrived, they had moved it deep inside the city, where no one would be able to get to it. But Zeta 9 took that as a challenge. Tomorrow, They were moving into the city's temple and not coming out without that anomaly. Richards and the rest of the mole rats prepared themselves for the expedition over the following few days. They were going to venture deep into the heart of the Kowloon walled city, far away from any supply lines or external Foundation support. They made sure they went in heavily armed, with their suits life support enabled, and prepared for every possibility. They departed on June 8th, heading straight into the belly of the city, where Henry had been abducted by the mob. At first it seemed strange, but not overtly anomalous, the same dingy, damp apartments full of garbage. But eventually they came upon what they were looking for. A small, tiny temple, Buddhist in style and design. It was made out of stone and wood, with a small Buddha statue out front. It was the only thing that looked remotely out of place, otherwise surrounded by shanties and cobbled-together homes. In the words of the great David Brin, this must be the place. At first, it was nothing new. The temple was too big on the inside, but it was nothing they hadn't seen in the 100 other rooms in this massive building. A small shrine, a few seats here and there, altars. But then Richards and the other agents noticed something. A sliding door built into the wall of the tiny 10-foot temple. It made no sense. A door would exit out into the apartment right next door. When they opened it, they found a hallway leading deeper into the structure, made of the same wood and rice paper that the temple was constructed from. It was long too. At this point, they should have been deep into the other apartments in the building, more so than any other room they had checked before. As they traveled down the corridor, they found more sliding doors lining the walls, more temple rooms, altars, and meditation chambers, all recreated and rearranged by the anomaly. It was like someone built 12 whole temples inside this one tiny structure, expanding ever inward. That must have been why they called this thing the Builder, whatever it was. The mole rats knew that this place was bound to be gigantic, and set up a small base camp in the original temple to stop any of the residents from getting the jump on them. Then they got their suits sealed, their equipment rigged up, and went to work exploring the various corridors, hallways, and temples that had grown out of this anomaly. At first it was simple and repetitive, but things started to get strange after the 6th hour of exploration. The rooms began to thin out, until the mole rats were mostly exploring uninterrupted long hallways made out of bamboo and rice paper. They came upon a room with something inside it, another meditation chamber, but this time a small bronze Buddha statue was placed in the center of the room. It was the size of Richard's fist, and his team collected a sample before moving to the sliding door at the rear of the room. They opened it up and exited right back into a meditation room with a tiny fist-sized Buddha in the center. For a second, they thought they had been transported backward, but this Buddha didn't have any samples taken out of it. It was an identical copy of the room they had just entered through. Strange, but not unexpected. They didn't bother taking a sample and moved to the next room, which was also a meditation chamber with a Buddha in the middle. All in all, they found 83 rooms in a row that were identical copies of that one chamber with the Buddha, connected by the sliding doors. After that experience, and a few hallways later, they came upon another familiar sight. A perfect recreation of the original altar room they had entered into the temple from, but with one difference. Rather than being made out of planks of wood and stone, this room seemed to be carved from a single massive piece of wood with no seams or breaks. There were no tool marks anywhere, and it looked as though it'd been somehow naturally formed, but they did find a small collection of documents written in Chinese in the corner. They scanned the documents and sent digital copies back to HQ. The agents at the base responded. The anomaly had been designated SCP-184, and the temple goers seemed to think it was a gift from God. They allowed people to bring it into their apartments for a small payment and let it grow the space. Zeta-9 resolved to grab it and get out before it could expand the temple any further. They bunked down for the night to get some sleep. The next morning, they continued moving through the temple until they hit a branch in the road and split the team. Richards picked one hallway and set out on his own, climbing upwards. The walls in this section of the temple were irregular. They were undulating, wavy. The wood and rice had given way to hard stone hallways. Richard slipped into one of the rooms to rest for a while and found that all the furniture was made of beautiful green jade, despite being wonderfully soft. He rested on the jade bed for a while before continuing on. He wrote in the journal that he didn't feel well, disconnected from the environment. Not like a usual mission. One of his team members had died, and the environment itself felt hostile. Without anyone else to talk to, he was thinking too much, but it was just nerves. He signed the journal and kept moving. For the next hours and days, Richards continued on. His suit's ability to make food and water was running low. As he moved through the stone temple, he saw something out of the corner of his eye that wasn't there when he looked again. He heard voices that couldn't possibly be there. He'd been climbing for so long, he'd lost track of time. While climbing up the shaft, he finally saw light and darted through, only to enter a room filled with lit candles, not sunlight. Enraged, he smashed them all with his helmet, breaking the helmet to pieces. He sat and cried for a while before dropping something down the shaft to see how far it was to the bottom, but never heard it hit the floor. He set his jaw. Screw containment. He had to find this thing and utterly destroy it. The next time he saw something, it was days later. His food and water had run out when he had found a hall filled with doors lining every surface. They all led back into the wall, but he noticed he was bleeding. The floor wasn't carpet, but razor-sharp stone pinpricks that had shredded the boots of his suit to ribbons, along with his feet. He returned to climbing after patching himself up a little. He had to kill this thing somehow. The rest of the entries are disparate and unsigned. One of the rare coherent ones revealed that he was at the top of the shaft, had something called the Hall to Forever, filled with light, and that he was going to kill the heart. Around the time these entries were written, the other members of Zeta 9 felt the temple shaking and cracking, growing unstable. They quickly evacuated, minutes before they saw the interior of the temple collapsing in on itself. The entire expanded area collapsed into the tiny space of the original altar room. Through the rubble, the members of Zeta 9 found Richard's journal, along with a tiny metal object, matching the descriptions of SCP-184. They never did find Richard's body. He went missing during the recovery, presumed killed in action. After it was brought back to base, Foundation researchers went to work on it. It was a tiny metal statuette in the shape of a dodecahedron. The metal it was made from was unknown, but tests revealed that it was magnetic and hard as brass. Experiments followed. They discovered that when they put SCP-184 inside an enclosed structure, like a room or building or even a cardboard box, it would expand the interior dimensions without making it grow larger. The effect was powerful. The rooms it was tested in would grow by hundreds of square meters every day. At first, it just moves the walls out, making the room up to 3 times bigger than it is. But after that, it gets strange. During a test in a small bedroom in a suburban home, after it grew the room 3 times in floor space, it began to create entirely new rooms. The researchers suddenly went in to find 3 kitchens, 6 bedrooms, a dozen bathrooms, and tens of closets. They were all fully furnished. SCP-184 was capable of copying materials from the rest of the building, but not particularly well. The appliances in the kitchen were made of wood or rock, and the furniture was limited to glass sofas and chairs. The rooms were oddly shaped as the house went on. At first, they were oval, but the deeper bedrooms were pentagonal and even star-shaped. They even found one bedroom that was a perfect sphere. Some of the doors led right into an empty wall, and the hallways changed in size and shape and led around into themselves like a labyrinth. The researchers quickly removed SCP-184 from the house and tried to figure out how to contain this thing. If there's one thing the Foundation is good at, it's locking things up in boxes. But locking this thing up in a box is the most dangerous thing they could possibly do. One researcher had an out-of-the-box idea. SCP-184 was placed between 2 electromagnets, which kept it floating in mid-air and made it impossible to pull away. That solved half the problem. and the Foundation knew exactly where to put it without enclosing it in a space. Only a few years after the events of Zeta-9's recovery, the Hong Kong government finally demolished the massive Kowloon walled city, replacing it with an open park commemorating the site, with many statuaries and relics from the city. The Foundation made sure they were able to install SCP-184's electromagnets as another statuary inside a gazebo, finally containing SCP-184 right where it had been all along. Be it ever so humble, there's no place like eternally recursive home.
What's up, explorers? Welcome back to the Abandoned Brandon YouTube channel, where we embark on the most extreme urban exploration adventures you've ever seen. We've camped out in an old asylum in England, rummaging through a decommissioned veterinary lab in Belgium, and even got lost in the underground drains of Australia. But now it's time for our most intense investigation yet. Just like my favorite Imagine Dragons song, this one is going to be radioactive. We're heading to the Bezouv Nuclear Power Facility, an abandoned nuclear power plant in rural, well, I probably shouldn't say where it is. Its location is kept secret due to the high risk of potential danger to anyone who goes there. So don't try this at home, kids. But don't worry, me and the rest of the team aren't about to be glowing in the dark anytime soon. The plant hasn't been active for decades. As long as we're careful, nothing can go wrong. Okay, you ready? Let's go.
Abandoned Brandon did not know it, but he would never film another YouTube video. The footage was seized by the SCP Foundation following Brandon's encounter with, well, we'll get to that in a moment. Let's just say he was unable to continue his promising YouTube career after. You'll see exactly why in just a little while. For brevity's sake, Brandon's footage has been trimmed down to only the most relevant portions, and we'll be filling in the blanks with additional details for better understanding. The day this fateful footage was shot, Brandon traveled to the Bezouv Nuclear Power Facility, accompanied by his assistant camera operator, his sound engineer, and his newly hired intern. The group had been cautioned against entering the power facility, which was located far away from any houses or hospitals, in the event that they needed help. But they saw this video as their ticket to fame. Chernobyl had recently gotten a great deal of renewed attention, and nuclear power was all the rage. Combine that with an exploration of a nuclear facility most people didn't even know existed, and it would be like printing money. Or so they thought. Getting into the area was easy enough. No one had much interest in breaking into the facility, so there was little need for tight security. There were a few warning signs as the team's rented van approached, mainly to keep anyone from accidentally stumbling onto the place. But radiation levels should have been safe in the area. There was really nothing to worry about, other than the standard risks that always came with trespassing somewhere they weren't supposed to be. That was just the name of the game, the little element of danger that kept their loyal viewers coming back. If anything, the team welcomed the smattering of warnings outside of the facility, making sure to capture some B-roll footage of the signs, written in Russian that they would translate later for their audience. Caution, hazardous materials, turn back toward main. They parked, did a quick sound and camera check to make sure the equipment was working correctly, and headed inside. Brandon led the way, swinging a bright flashlight beam to and fro as he moved. They did all of their explorations in the dead of night, when they were least likely to be caught. Besides, it was spookier to film at night, and that made for more engaging content. Just as they were about to pass the fence and head into the building itself, Brandon's intern piped up.
Are we sure this is safe? Shouldn't we be testing for radiation with one of those, thingies?
Brandon scoffed.
What, a Geiger counter? It's fine. This place has been empty for like ages, and it's not like they had a leak or something anyway.
I don't know, I have a weird feeling about this, the camera operator remarked. Brandon rolled his eyes. If you're too chicken, give me the camera and you can go wait in the van. But not wanting to miss out on the paycheck or deal with the mockery that would surely come later, the camera operator relented. With Brandon still in the lead, the four made their way inside. When it came to eerie atmospheric footage, this place was a goldmine. It had all been left intact, just as it was when operational. But with everything turned off and no activity for decades, it felt truly empty, truly hollow. There was dust on every visible surface, spiderwebs dangling from walls and beams, but it wasn't as dark as they had expected. Were there windows somewhere, letting in moonlight? They couldn't see any. As the group moved further into the facility, Brandon noticed a faint blue glow that bathed everything in a soft, pulsing light. He called out to the camera operator, demanding that he follow close behind, As Brandon tried to find the source of the light, he followed the glow, looking for the place where it shone the brightest. When he found it, he stopped in his tracks, mouth hanging agape. No way. The light was coming from one of the nuclear reactor cores, that pulsing, unmistakable blue. But that wasn't all. There were strange threads growing out of the ground, up and around the reactor cores. I thought this place wasn't active anymore. The cameraman's voice was shaking. It's not supposed to be. Brandon took a step closer to the reactor core closest to him, peering into it. It looked like there was something inside, a strange shape. Can you come here? Zoom in on that. The cameraman shook his head. No way. I'm staying back here. Fine, give me the camera and I'll do it. Brandon took the camera roughly and moved back toward the core. The shape inside. It was like the outline of a person, like a faint shadow there, hiding in the light. Brandon was preparing to continue his investigation of the area when suddenly a pair of screams cut through the stillness of the chamber. The other crew members had to be responsible for the noise. What was that? We should go check! The cameraman insisted. Brandon wanted to protest, but thought about how insensitive that might make him look. The two men headed back toward the entrance to see what had shaken up the others so badly. When they got there, they found the intern and the sound engineer trembling, white-faced and wide-eyed. We need to get out of here, the intern stammered. This place is haunted. Brandon burst out laughing. I thought you guys were hurt or something. You just got scared? Come on, there's no such thing as ghosts. But as soon as he finished his dismissive statement, he spotted motion out of the corner of his eye. He turned to see a faint, glowing, ghostly outline of a man walking down the corridor, walking toward him. He let out a shriek and nearly dropped the camera in shock. He caught it just in time, saving himself thousands of dollars and a lot of trouble. Sure enough, there was what he could only call a ghost right there in front of him. At the sound of his cry, the figure turned to face him and began walking toward him. He took a step back, but the figure waved at him, a gesture so friendly and jarring that he almost started laughing all over again. No way, this place really is haunted. Here, take this. He shoved the camera back into the cameraman's hands. Make sure we're rolling. Sound, are we recording? The engineer, still shaking, nodded. Perfect. He approached the ghost, calling out to it. Hey, we come in peace, Mr. Ghost. My name's Brandon. Can you tell us your name? The figure paused and tilted its head to the side. There was a slight whispering sound, like air rustling through dry leaves, but no discernible words. Whatever this thing was, whether it was a ghost or not, it could not speak. It turned around and began walking away from Brandon and the others. Hey, wait! He called out. He'd found his scoop, the ultimate scoop, the thing that would set him apart from every other YouTuber out there, and he wasn't about to lose it now. Brandon followed the ghostly figure back to the reactor cores, which continued to emit the same blue light. At the side of the glowing reactor cores, the intern piped up again. This can't be safe. We should get out of here. You can go if you want. I'm staying. He watched as the figure walked from core to core, pausing for a moment at each one. He was looking in, checking on the figures inside. What is that? He asked, though he knew the entity could not answer him. After checking every core, it stopped and produced a small cylindrical item, as translucent and ethereal as its body, and held it to its mouth. If Brandon did not know any better, he'd say the ghost was smoking a cigar. This is too weird, he beamed. The sound engineer suddenly let out a gasp, nearly dropping his boom microphone. There's more of them. Sure enough, two more ghostly figures were approaching the group. These new ghosts were smaller, the size of children, and they moved much more quickly. They darted around the floor, chasing each other. They ran right between the sound engineer and the intern, knocking into them both on the way. The intern shuddered and clutched at his stomach. He let out a groan of pain. I don't feel so good. Brandon was about to crack a joke at the intern's expense when a sudden searing pain ripped through his abdomen, making him double over. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and when he looked down at his hands, they were shaking uncontrollably. All of a sudden, he felt sick. Not just sick, but deathly ill. His knees wobbled as he tried to stand up straight, as if all the strength had been snapped from his muscles. As much as he wanted to stay and get more footage of these radiation ghosts, he knew the intern was right. Something was very wrong, and they needed to get out of there. The footage they had already captured would have to be enough. Okay, he sputtered, fighting the urge to vomit. Let's go! But the closer they got to the exit, the weaker they all became.
The ghosts followed, keeping an eye on the team with concerned expressions, but there was nothing they could do to help. The cameraman began to bleed from the nose, while the sound engineer was coughing up blood with nearly every step. Brandon collapsed to the ground, and the intern had to half carry him the rest of the way. They made it back to the van and made the too-long drive to the nearest hospital, but when they arrived, it was already too late. They were all diagnosed with acute radiation sickness, and there was no cure. By the next day, the 4 of them were dead. This incident captivated local authorities, who could not explain why the power facility had become active again, or how a leak this deadly had occurred. But whatever caused it, the radiation levels were highly dangerous, and there were strange rumors circulating about ghosts in the building. Word reached the SCP Foundation, and the location was declared an anomaly. The Bezov nuclear power facility and the 5-mile perimeter that surrounded was fenced off and monitored via security cameras. Radiation sensors were wired to alarms in order to provide an early warning system in the event of a containment breach, unlikely as that would be. The whole place, including any beings haunting it, was designated SCP-1951. SCP-1951 is a series of phenomena in and around the Bezov nuclear power plant in an undisclosed location. Though it was previously condemned and abandoned, it became active again following a series of mysterious events. The first unusual entity observed in the area was a translucent humanoid figure in the shape of an adult man, referred to as SCP-1951-A. SCP-1951-A has not exhibited any hostile behavior and is frequently seen walking around in a leisurely fashion and smoking something resembling a cigar. Like its body, the cigar is translucent. It has a habit of waving at and approaching guards, as if to strike up a conversation, though it is not capable of making any sound. These approaches have resulted in multiple cases of severe radiation poisoning and 2 deaths. The deaths appear to have been unintentional, as SCP-1951-A appears distressed when informed that it had killed 2 guards. It has also since complied with orders from the guards to keep its distance. Due to the entity's incorporeal and dangerous nature, no physical testing can be done on it. Any gunshots fired at the entity will pass through its body harmlessly, and if blown apart with explosives, its body will reform after a few moments. Following its discovery, the SCP Foundation made detailed logs of their observations of SCP-1951 over an 8-month period. The most significant entries in this log have been included in the official file for SCP-1951. First, a new entity was sighted on the grounds of the power plant, similar in appearance to SCP-1951-A, though slightly smaller in stature. This entity was frequently seen with SCP-1951-A, and due to their association and similar nature, was designated SCP-1951-B. The 2 appeared to speak with one another, though of course they produced no detectable sound. They also shared physical contact, including hugs, holding hands, and giving what appeared to be kisses on the cheek and the rest of the face. Though the observing researchers could not be entirely certain, the 2 entities appeared to behave like a couple. Several weeks later, 2 small humanoid figures emerged from the cargo bay of the facility. They resembled the composition of the other 2, but were notably smaller, almost like children. They were not only childlike in appearance, but in behavior as well. Upon first emerging from the cargo hold, the 2 chased each other back and forth around the grounds, tapping each other harmlessly when they caught one another. What they were up to quickly became apparent to anyone paying attention. They were playing a game of tag. As the 2 played their game, SCP-1951-A and B emerged from the ground behind the 2 child figures and surprised them. There was a sound, a low-frequency moan resembling human speech, and then the group faded from sight. Some months later, radiation from the facility triggered a false alarm, the 5th that week. This suggested an increased output in radiation from SCP-1951. When the Foundation checked in on the area, they spotted 3 additional entities, including another humanoid figure. Out of concern regarding the increasing radiation levels produced by these figures, Command ordered monthly scheduled purges of the facility. During these purges, the area would be bombarded with GV-20 EMP grenades. Following the most recent purge, all of the entities but SCP-1951-A were eliminated or disabled, with the exception of the entities located in the reactor chamber. At this point, radiation levels on the ground were lethal, Any monitoring of SCP-1951 was only possible through exploratory drones. Shortly after the purge, one of the drones returned to Foundation Base, its housing laced with strings of glowing filament. They were arranged to form letters, spelling out words. "You've left Alexei all alone." No communication from SCP-1951 has been documented since. The silhouette of SCP-1951-A, or quite possibly Alexei, can still be seen from time to time. It no longer waves to the guards or tries to greet them. It stands alone, smoking its phantom cigar, and occasionally resting its head in its hands, as if weeping, as if in grief.